the way that they say gravity causes masses to do to other masses. So really, this gravity theory is just an illusion that they've told you to make you believe that it's possible that the oceans could be curved around a spinning ball like this, and that you could be in Australia upside down and experience yourself as right side up and never fall off. These are all just ways to make you stop believing your eyes. It's pseudoscience to remove you from the actual known science for thousands of years, which is that things fall or rise based on their relative density. It has nothing to do with gravity. If something is more dense, then it goes lower. If something is less dense, it just moves higher. If you've got a helium balloon, how come gravity doesn't bring that down to the Earth? Well, because the helium is lighter than the oxygen and nitrogen and other elements in the air around it, so it naturally rises. Oh, but then you hold a rock and let it go, and the gravity is what causes the rock to drop, right? No, it's the relative density. The rock is denser than the air, so it falls. That's it.
Utter banality. The Earth is round. It's proven. To debunk that fucking bullshit, just denial. Fuck, we work so hard to educate just the simple fucking things. And all you want to do is tell us that the Earth is not round. The absurdity of that is astounding. It trips me up in a way that makes me want to dance. It makes me want to shout. It makes me want to fuck. Stop believing the bullshit. Stop believing the fucking bullshit. There's all that out there. Follow through. Think for yourself and follow through. It takes time. It hurts. It hurts to research shit. But you gotta look into shit. You gotta dig. And you go, okay. Wow. Maybe all that shit that I see on the screens on my fucking TV or my fucking iPad, maybe they're lying to me. Can't trust them. Think for yourself. The dialective imperative is still important. It's more important now. The dialectic is more important now than ever before, because everything that's being questioned could be solved completely by the Socratic method. We can solve it all by the Socratic method. And people in direct contradiction of that are fools. Disinformation, falsehoods, and utter lies do not help our human condition one iota.
It's the love of science. If science is open to revision, in light of evidence, however, that's the caveat.
In light of evidence.
You bring evidence that it's flat, you put one side of a scale, all the evidence in the world that it's flat, and all the evidence in the world that it's an oblate spheroid or spherical. Which side do you think is heavier?
This should be like the thing everybody's talking about. What is it then? Which one is it, right?
Shit.
Life on the ball, fantastic, we don't fall. Amazing how the sun can shine so high. Life on the ball, gravity explains it all. Be thankful that the moon remains in your sky. You don't have to be 3 standard deviations higher than the average Asian to see someone pissing down your leg and telling you it's raining. Who Who's your teacher? I'll step in the class and touch 'em. Lessons to smash and crush 'em. Weapons of mass destruction. Itching to gas and flush 'em. I know you know my motto. Nothing precedes my duty. They call me obligado. They think the house is holy. It's incommunicado. They full of guacamole. I crush the avocados. Call me the virtuoso now. That means aficionado. Master of the Stratocaster. Wizard with the pizzicato. Luciferian foolishness is what you follow. Believing you're on a ball, you have all knelt down to swallow. Fuck all your bravado. If you're dissing Mr. Dubé, you're dead or your head's just hollow. I used to marvel at your little blue marble, but now it's impossible to continent your global model. Life on the ball, fantastic, we don't fall. Ain't it amazing? Amazing how the sun can shine so high. That's what they told you. Life on the ball, gravity explains it all. That explains everything. Be thankful that the moon remains in your sky.
Wolves in sheep's clothing have pulled the wool over our eyes. For almost 500 years, the masses have been thoroughly deceived by a cosmic fairy tale of astronomical proportions. We have been taught a falsehood so gigantic and diabolical that it has blinded us from our own experience and common sense, from seeing the world and the universe as they truly are. Through pseudoscience books and programs, mass media and public education, universities and government propaganda, the world has been systematically brainwashed, slowly indoctrinated over centuries into the unquestioning belief of the greatest lie of all time. David Wardlaw Scott said, "Children are taught in their geography books, when too young to apprehend aright the meaning of such things, that the world is a great globe revolving around the sun, and the story is repeated continuously year by year till they reach maturity, at which time they generally become so absorbed in other matters as to be indifferent as to whether the teaching be true or not, and, as they hear of nobody contradicting it, they presume that it must be the correct thing, if not to believe, at least to receive it as a fact. They thus tacitly give their assent to a theory which, if it had first been presented to them at what are called years of discretion, they would at once have rejected. The consequences of evil teaching, whether in religion or in science, are far more disastrous than is generally supposed, especially in a luxurious, laissez-faire age like our own. The intellect becomes weakened, and the conscience seared. For 500 years, an elite cabal of sun worshippers has propagated this nihilistic, atheistic cosmology and cosmogony, unquestioningly believed by the vast majority of the world. We have been taught, contrary to all common sense and experience, that the seemingly motionless, flat earth beneath our feet is actually a massive, moving ball spinning through space at over 1,000 miles per hour, wobbling and tilted 23.5 degrees on its vertical axis, while orbiting the sun at a blinding 67,000 miles per hour, in concert with the entire solar system, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the Milky Way, and careening across the expanding universe away from the Big Bang at an incredible 670 million miles per hour, but that you can feel and experience none of it. We have been taught that a mysterious force called gravity, a magical magnetism responsible for keeping everything from falling or flying off the spinning ball Earth, is just strong enough to hold people, oceans, and the atmosphere tightly to the surface, but just weak enough to allow bugs, birds, and planes to take off with ease." David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "I remember being taught when a boy that the earth was a great ball revolving at a very rapid rate around the sun, and when I expressed to my teacher my fears that the waters of the oceans would tumble off, I was told that they were prevented from doing so by Newton's great law of gravitation, which kept everything in its proper place. I presume that my countenance must have shown some signs of incredulity, for my teacher immediately added, 'I can show you a direct proof of this. A man can whirl around his head a pail filled with water without its being spilt, and so, in like manner, can the oceans be carried round the sun without losing a drop.' As this illustration was evidently intended to settle the matter, I then said no more upon the subject. Had such been proposed to me afterwards as a man, I would have answered somewhat as follows. Sir, I beg to say that the illustration you have given of a man whirling a pail of water round his head, and the oceans revolving round the sun, does not in any degree confirm your argument, because the water in the two cases is placed under entirely different circumstances, but, to be of any value, the conditions in each case must be the same, which here they are not. The pail is a hollow vessel which holds the water inside it, whereas, according to your teaching, the earth is a ball, with a continuous curvature outside, which, in agreement with the laws of nature, could not retain any water. We have been taught that the ball earth spins at a constant velocity, perfectly dragging the atmosphere along so we cannot feel the slightest bit of motion, perturbation, wind, or air resistance. They say we cannot feel any of this motion because the magical velcro of gravity pulls the atmosphere precisely along, and we cannot measure any of this motion because the stars are so incredibly far away that over 100 million miles of supposed annual orbit around the sun amounts to not a single inch of relative parallax change. How convenient. We have been taught that the apparent orbit of the sun, planets, and stars, but not the moon, around the earth are all optical illusions, that it is, in fact, the earth beneath our feet which moves, and our eyes that deceive us. Special exception is made for the moon, however, which is said to revolve around the earth just as it appears. Since we only ever see one side of the moon, we have been taught this is because the moon's supposed 10.3 mile per hour west to east rotation, combined with its 2,288 mile per hour orbit of Earth, just happens to be the exact motion and speed necessary to perfectly cancel out the Earth's supposed 1,000 mile per hour east to west rotation and 67,000 mile per hour orbit of the Sun, thereby creating the perpetual dark side of the moon illusion. Oh really? Though the Sun and Moon appear to be relatively small, equal-sized bodies revolving around a stationary Earth, we have been taught that this too is an optical illusion, and they are in fact thousands of miles divergent in diameter. They say the Sun is actually a whopping 865,374 miles across, 109 times wider than the Earth, and, contrary to all experience, experiments, and common sense, that we revolve around it. They say the Moon is 2,159 miles across, a quarter the size of the Earth, and why they appear the same size is because the Moon is only 238,000 miles away, while the Sun is an unfathomable 93 million miles away from the Earth, and these just happen to be the exact diameters and distances necessary for a viewer from Earth to falsely perceive them as being the same size. You don't say. Lactantius, in his On the False Wisdom of the Philosophers, wrote, "A sphere where people on the other side live with their feet above their heads, where rain, snow, and hail fall upwards, where trees and crops grow upside down, and the sky is lower than the ground. The ancient wonder of the hanging gardens of Babylon dwindle into nothing in comparison to the fields, seas, towns, and mountains that pagan philosophers believe to be hanging from the earth without support." David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "I confess that I cannot imagine how any human being, in his proper senses, can believe that the sun is stationary when, with his own eyes, he sees it revolving around the heavens, nor how he can believe that the earth on which he stands is whirling with the speed of lightning around the sun when he feels not the slightest motion." We have been taught that those tiny pinpricks of light in the night sky known as planets or wandering stars are actually physical, globular, Earth-like habitations millions of miles away. We have even been shown supposed video footage of the one called Mars. We have been taught that the tiny pinpricks of light in the sky known as the fixed stars are actually distant suns trillions of miles away, each complete with their own solar systems, orbiting moons, and Earth-like planets which potentially harbor alien life. We have been taught that the moon has no light of its own, but is merely a reflector of the sun's light, that some masons from NASA actually walked on the moon, that some other Masons from NASA sent rovers to Mars, that satellites and space stations are incessantly spinning in suspended animation above the Earth, that Hubble telescopes are taking snapshots of distant planets, galaxies, stars, quasars, black holes, wormholes, and other fantastic celestial phenomena. We have been taught that our ignorant ancient ancestors for millennia falsely believed the Earth to be the flat, immovable center of the universe. But thanks to modern science and its Masonic prophets like Copernicus, Newton, Galileo, Collins, Aldrin, and Armstrong, we now believe the world to be a giant whirling sea-Earth globe careening through infinite space. Thomas Winship wrote, "Modern astronomical teaching affirms that the world we live on is a globe which rotates, revolves, and spins away in space at brain-reeling rates of speed, that the sun is 1.5 million times the volume of the Earth globe and nearly 100 million miles distant from it, that the moon is about 1/4 the size of the Earth, that it receives all its light from the sun, and is thus only a reflector and not a giver of light, that it attracts the body of the Earth and thus causes the tides, that the stars are worlds and suns, some of them equal in importance to our own sun himself, and others vastly his superior, that these worlds inhabited by sentient beings are without numbers and occupy space boundless in extent and illimitable in duration, the whole of these interlaced bodies being subject to and supported by universal gravitation, the foundation and father of the whole fabric. To fanciful minds and theoretical speculators, the so-called science of modern astronomy furnishes a field unsurpassed in any science for the unrestrained license of the imagination, and the building up of a complicated conjuration of absurdities, such as to overawe the simpleton and make him gape with wonder, to deceive even those who truly believe their assumptions to be facts. We have been taught that science books like Newton's Principia Mathematica, which propound the spherical heliocentric myth, are the bearers of truth, while backwater religious books like the Bible, which propound a flat geocentric Earth, are merely outdated myths. We have been taught that the universe was unintelligently designed and randomly created in a cosmic coincidence of nothing inexplicably becoming everything. We have been taught that through millions upon millions of years of accidental evolution and happenstance, the Big Bang universe began manifesting suns, moons, planets, then water, then somehow out of dead, inert elements, single-celled conscious organisms came to life, grew and multiplied and mutated into larger, different organisms, which continued to grow, multiply, and mutate, gaining diversity and complexity, and losing credibility, to the point where amphibians crawled up on land, replaced gills with lungs, started breathing air, maturated into mammals, became bipedal, grew opposable thumbs, evolved into monkeys. Then in one final fluke adaptation, a hybrid monkey man was made, and the rest is human history. Thomas Winship wrote, "Put together all the imaginary exploits in the air specially written to interest the young, add to this all the wonderful adventures of airships recorded in The Daughter of the Revolution, and tack on to this all the wild and impossible things found in current libraries of fiction, and I venture to say that the grand total will record nothing so utterly impossible or so supremely ridiculous as this modern scientific delusion of a globe spinning away in space in several different directions at the same time at rates of speed which no man is able to grasp, with the inhabitants, some hanging heads down and others at various angles to suit the inclination. Write down all the swindles that ever were perpetrated. Name all the hoaxes you ever heard or read about. Include all of the impostures and bubbles ever exposed. Make a list of all the snares that popular credulity could ever be exposed to, and you will fail in getting within sight or hearing of an imposture so gross, a hoax so ingenious, or a bubble of such gigantic proportions as has been perpetrated and forced upon unthinking multitudes in the name of science, and as proved incontrovertible fact by the expounders of modern astronomy. Again and again have their theories been combated and exposed, but as often have the majority who did not think for themselves accepted the popular thing." We have been taught that the height of stupidity and naivety was when our ignorant ancestors believed the earth to be flat, and that if any man somehow still thinks the earth to be the immovable center of the universe, that they must be the most primitive kind of ignoramus. Nowadays, the label flat earther has become literally synonymous with moron, and is a common cliché derogatory term for insulting someone's intelligence. Upon seeing a book titled The Flat Earth Conspiracy, your ingrained instinct was likely to laugh, mock the messenger, and deny the very possibility. Marshall Hall said, "What strikes you as being some thoughts that people would have if, in the short space of a few weeks, the universally held conviction that the Earth rotates on an axis daily and orbits the Sun annually were exposed as an unscientific deception? Keep in mind that a rotating, orbiting Earth is not counted as a mere hypothesis or even a theory anywhere in the world today. Oh no, rather, this concept is an unquestioned truth, an established fact in all books and other media everywhere, church media included. Copernicanism, in short, is a concept that is protected in a bunker under a 50-foot thick ceiling of solid scientific concrete. It is meant to be impregnable. It is a concept that has become ensconced in men's minds as the indestructible cornerstone of enlightened modern man's knowledge. Virtually all people everywhere have been taught to believe, and do believe, that this concept is based on objective science and dispassionate secular reasoning." B. Chasbro wrote, 99 people out of 100 would give the same answer to the interrogation, and that same answer would be to the effect that the Earth is a globe which revolves around the Sun. The 99 who makes this reply would do it because they know it to be the case. How do they know it? Let this question be put to them, and they will bestow upon you a withering smile of pity at what they conceive to be an imbecility of mind on your part, and answer you in something like the following style. "It has always been so. We learnt it at school. Clever men say so, and look how astronomers can foretell eclipses," and then lose their temper at the very idea of the globular theory being incorrect, and a haughty "there can be no doubt about it" will close all they have to say on the subject. Now if the ears of these 99 could only be gained, they would be shown, in an irresistible manner, that the philosophy which would speak of a round and revolving world is a false philosophy. Ancient civilizations the world over believed Earth to be the flat, immovable center of the universe, around which the heavens revolved daily cycles in perfect circles. This stable geocentric universe, proven true by experience and experiments, which reigned undisputed for thousands of years, adequately explaining all earthly and celestial phenomena, was violently uprooted, spun around, and sent flying through infinite space by a cabal of sun-worshipping theoretical astronomers. Early Masonic magicians like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton, along with their modern Masonic astronaut counterparts like Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, hand in hand with NASA and World Freemasonry, have pulled off the greatest hoax, propagated the most phenomenal lie, and perpetuated the most complete indoctrination in history. Over the course of 500 years, using everything from books, magazines, and television to computer-generated imaging, a multi-generational conspiracy has succeeded in the minds of the masses to pick up the fixed Earth, shape it into a ball, spin it in circles, and throw it around the sun. In schools where every professor's desk is adorned with a spinning Earth globe, we are lectured on the heliocentric theory of the universe, shown images of ball planets, and videos of men suspended in space. The illusion created, connivingly convincing, has entranced the world's population into blindly believing a maleficent myth. The greatest cover-up of all time, NASA and Freemasonry's biggest secret, is that we are living on a plane, not a planet, that Earth is the flat, stationary center of the universe. Lady Blunt wrote, "We are told that though the Earth has the appearance of being a vast plain with the sun moving high above and over the Earth, that what we see is a deception, it is an optical illusion, for it is not the sun that moves, but the Earth, with the sea and all that in them is, in the form of a globe, whizzing with terrific rapidity round the sun, located millions of miles away, its mean distance being assumed to be 91 millions of miles, and that the Earth travels at a rate of 68,000 miles an hour, or 19 miles every second. Alan Daves said, "If the government or NASA had said to you that the Earth is stationary, imagine that. And then imagine we are trying to convince people that no, it's not stationary. It's moving forward at 32 times rifle bullet speed and spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. We would be laughed at. We would have so many people telling us, you are crazy. The Earth's not moving." We would be ridiculed for having no scientific backing for this convoluted moving Earth theory. And not only that, but then people would say, "Oh, then how do you explain a fixed calm atmosphere and the sun's observable movement? How do you explain that?" Imagine saying to people, No, the atmosphere is moving also, but is somehow magically velcroed to the moving Earth. The reason is not simply because the Earth is stationary. So what we are actually doing is what makes sense. We are saying that the moving Earth theory is nonsense. The stationary Earth theory makes sense, and we are being ridiculed. You've got to picture it being the other way around to realize just how ridiculous this situation is. This theory from the government and NASA that the Earth is rotating and orbiting and leaning over and wobbling is absolute nonsense, and yet people are clinging to it tightly, like a teddy bear. They just can't bring themselves to face the possibility that the Earth is stationary, though all the evidence shows it. We feel no movement. The atmosphere hasn't been blown away. We see the sun move from east to west. Everything can be explained by a motionless Earth without bringing in all these assumptions to cover up previous assumptions gone bad. If the Earth were truly a spinning ball orbiting the sun, there are several tests and experiments which could be and have been conducted to prove or disprove the veracity of such a claim. For example, Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time, positing that if the Earth revolved in an orbit around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months of orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, almost 200 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, and not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars. Thomas Winship wrote, "If the Earth is at a given point in space on, say, January 1st, and according to present-day science at a distance of 190 million miles from that point 6 months afterwards, it follows that the relative position and directions of the stars will have greatly changed, however small the angle of parallax may be. That this great change is nowhere apparent and has never been observed incontestably proves that the Earth is at rest, that it does not move in an orbit round the Sun." Samuel Rowbotham wrote, "Take 2 carefully bored metallic tubes, not less than 6 feet in length, and place them 1 yard asunder on the opposite sides of a wooden frame or a solid block of wood or stone. So adjust them that their centers of axes of vision shall be perfectly parallel to each other. Now direct them to the plane of some notable fixed star a few seconds previous to its meridian time. Let an observer be stationed at each tube, and the moment the star appears in the first tube, let a loud knock or other signal be given, to be repeated by the observer at the second tube when he first sees the same star. A distinct period of time will elapse between the signals given. The signals will follow each other in very rapid succession, but still the time between is sufficient to show that the same star is not visible at the same moment by 2 parallel lines of sight when only 1 yard asunder. A slight inclination of the second tube towards the first tube would be required for the star to be seen through both tubes at the same instant. Let the tubes remain in their position for 6 months, at the end of which time the same observation or experiment will produce the same results. The star will be visible at the same meridian time, without the slightest alteration being required in the direction of the tubes, from which it is concluded that if the Earth had moved 1 single yard in an orbit through space, there would at least be observed the slight inclination of the tube, which the difference in position of 1 yard had previously required. but as no such difference in the direction of the tube is required, the conclusion is unavoidable, that in 6 months a given meridian upon the Earth's surface does not move a single yard, and therefore that the Earth has not the slightest degree of orbital motion. When Tycho Brahe demonstrated that after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax could be detected, desperate heliocentrists, instead of conceding, doubled down, claiming the stars were all actually trillions upon trillions of miles away from us, so distant that no appreciable parallax could ever be detected. This convenient explanation, which heliocentrists have clung to for centuries, has proven satisfactory to silence the uninquisitive minds of the masses, but still fails to adequately address many observable phenomena, such as our wildly implausible synchronization with Polaris. William Carpenter wrote, "The idea that the Earth, if it were a globe, could possibly move in an orbit of hundreds of millions of miles with such exactitude that the crosshairs in a telescope fixed on its surface would appear to glide gently over a star millions of miles away, is simply monstrous, whereas with a fixed telescope it matters not the distance of the stars, though we suppose them to be as far off as the astronomer supposes them to be, for, as Mr. Richard Proctor himself says, the further away they are, the less they will seem to shift. Why, in the name of common sense, should observers have to fix their telescopes on solid stone bases so that they should not move a hair's breadth, if the Earth on which they fix them moves at the rate of 19 miles in a second? Indeed, to believe that Mr. Proctor's mass of 6,000 million tons is rolling, surging, flying, darting on through space forever, with a velocity compared with which a shot from a cannon is a very slow coach, with such unerring accuracy that a telescope fixed on granite pillars in an observatory will not enable a lynx-eyed astronomer to detect a variation in its onward motion of the 1,000th part of a hair's breadth, is to conceive a miracle compared with which all the miracles on record put together would sink into utter insignificance. Captain R.J. Morrison, the late compiler of Zadkiel's Almanac, says, "We declare that this motion is all mere bosh, and that the arguments which uphold it are, when examined with an eye that seeks for truth, mere nonsense and childish absurdity." Another experiment repeatedly performed to disprove Earth's supposed rotation under our feet is firing cannonballs vertically and horizontally in all cardinal directions. If the Earth were truly spinning eastwards underneath us, as the heliocentric model suggests, then vertically fired cannonballs should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, though, whenever this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs perfectly aimed with a plumb line, lit with a slow match, shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, sometimes directly back into the muzzle. If the Earth were actually spinning at the supposed rate of 600 to 700 miles per hour at the mid-latitudes of England and America, where the tests have been performed, the cannonballs should fall a full 8,400 feet, or over 1.5 miles behind the cannon. Again, at this point, instead of conceding, desperate heliocentrists triple down, claiming the reason cannonballs fall straight back is because the magical properties of gravity allow Earth to somehow drag the entire lower atmosphere in perfect synchronization with its axial spin, rendering even such breakneck speeds completely unnoticeable to the observer and unmeasurable by experimentation. This highly implausible, though clever and convenient explanation only holds for vertically fired cannons, however. If cannons are instead fired and measured in all cardinal directions, even the heliocentrist's atmospheric Velcro trump card becomes unplayable. North-south firing cannonballs establish a control, then east-firing cannonballs should fall significantly farther than all others, and west-firing cannonballs should fall significantly closer due to the supposed 1,000-mile-per-hour eastward rotation of the Earth. In actual fact, however, regardless of which direction cannons are fired, north, south, east, or west, the distance covered is always the same. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "When sitting in a rapidly moving railway carriage, let a spring gun be fired forward, or in the direction in which the train is moving. Again let the same gun be fired, but in the opposite direction, and it will be found that the ball or other projectile will always go farther in the first case than in the latter. If a person leaps backward from a horse in full gallop, he cannot jump so great a distance as he can by jumping forward. Leaping from a moving sledge, coach, or other object backwards or forwards, the same results are experienced. Many other practical cases could be cited to show that any body projected from another body in motion does not exhibit the same behavior as it does when projected from a body at rest. Nor are the results the same when projected in the same direction as that in which the body moves, as when projected in the opposite direction, because, in the former case, the projected body receives its momentum from the projectile force plus that given to it by the moving body, and in the latter case, this momentum minus that of the moving body. Hence, it would be found that if the Earth is moving rapidly from west to east, a cannon fired in due easterly direction would send a ball to a greater distance than it would if fired in a due westerly direction. But the most experienced artillerymen, many of whom have had great practice both at home and abroad, in almost every latitude, have declared that no difference whatsoever is observable, that in charging and pointing their guns, no difference in the working is ever required. Gunners in warships have noticed a considerable difference in the results of their firing from guns at the bow when sailing rapidly toward the object fired at, and when firing from guns placed at the stern while sailing away from the object, and in both cases the results are different to those observed when firing from a ship at perfect rest. These details of practical experience are utterly incompatible with the supposition of a revolving earth. William Carpenter wrote, "It is in evidence that if a projectile be fired from a rapidly moving body in an opposite direction to that in which the body is going, it will fall short of the distance at which it would reach the ground if fired in the direction of motion. Now, since the earth is said to move at the rate of 19 miles in a second of time from east to west, it would make all the difference imaginable if the gun were fired in an opposite direction. But as, in practice, there is not the slightest difference whichever way the thing may be done, we have a forcible overthrow of all the fancies relative to the motion of the earth." During the Crimean War, the subject of artillery fire in connection with the earth's rotation became a hotly discussed topic among military men, scientists, philosophers, and statesmen. Around this time, on December 20th, 1857, British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston wrote to the Secretary of War, Lord Panmure, stating, "There is an investigation which it would be important, and at the same time easy to make, and that is, whether the rotation of the earth on its axis has any effect on the curve of a cannonball in its flight. One should suppose that it has, and that while the cannonball is flying in the air, impelled by the gunpowder, in a straight line from the cannon's mouth, the ball would not follow the rotation of the earth in the same manner which it would if lying at rest on the earth's surface. If this be so, a ball fired in the meridional direction, that is to say, due south or due north, ought to deviate to the west of the object at which it was aimed, because during the time of flight that object will have gone to the east somewhat faster than the cannonball will have done. The trial might be easily made in any place in which a free circle of a mile or more radius could be obtained, and a cannon placed in the center of that circle, and fired alternately north, south, east, and west, with equal charges, would afford the means of ascertaining whether each shot flew the same distance or not. Several such experiments have since been performed and shown that projectiles fired in various directions on Earth's surface always cover comparable distances with no appreciable difference whatsoever. These results are entirely against the theory of a rotating, revolving world, and serve as direct empirical evidence for the stationary Earth. More evidence, similar to the cannonball experiment, is found in helicopters and airplanes. If the Earth were spinning several hundred miles per hour beneath our feet, helicopter pilots and hot air balloonists should be able to simply ascend straight up, hover, and wait for their lateral destinations to reach them. Since such a thing has never happened in the history of aeronautics, however, haughty heliocentrists must once again rely on Newton's magical atmospheric Velcro, claiming the lower atmosphere, up to an undetermined height, somewhere above the reach of helicopters, hot air balloons, and anything not built by NASA, is pulled perfectly along with the rotating Earth, rendering such experiments moot. Granting heliocentrists their atmospheric glue supposition helps them dismiss the results of vertically fired cannonball experiments, but does not and cannot help them explain away the results of horizontal cardinally fired cannonballs. Similarly, granting them their magic Velcro helps dismiss the results of hovering helicopter and hot air balloon experiments, but does not and cannot explain away the results of airplanes flying in cardinal directions. For instance, if both the Earth and its lower atmosphere are supposedly rotating together eastwards 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, then airplane pilots would need to make an extra 1,038 mile per hour compensation acceleration when flying westwards. North and southbound pilots would by necessity have to set diagonal courses to compensate. Since no such compensations are ever necessary, except in the imaginations of astronomers, it follows that the Earth does not move. Gabrielle Henriette wrote, "If flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the Earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the Earth's rotation. The distance covered by an aircraft would be reduced or increased by the speed of the rotation according to whether such aircraft traveled in the same direction or against it. Thus, if the Earth rotates, as it is said, at 1,000 miles an hour, and a plane flies in the same direction at only 500 miles, it is obvious that its place of destination will be farther removed every minute. On the other hand, if flying took place in the direction opposite to that of the rotation, a distance of 1,500 miles would be covered in 1 hour, instead of 500, since the speed of the rotation is to be added to that of the plane. It could also be pointed out that such a flying speed of 1,000 miles an hour, which is supposed to be that of the Earth's rotation, has recently been achieved, so that an aircraft flying at this rate in the same direction as that of the rotation could not cover any ground at all. It would remain suspended in mid-air over the spot from which it took off. Since both speeds are equal, there would, in addition, be no need to fly from one place to another situated on the same latitude. The aircraft could just rise and wait for the desired country to arrive in the ordinary course of the rotation, and then land. The heliocentric theory, literally flying in the face of direct observation, experimental evidence, and common sense, maintains that the ball Earth is spinning around its axis at 1,000 miles per hour, revolving around the Sun at 67,000 miles per hour, while the entire solar system rotates around the Milky Way galaxy at 500,000 miles per hour, and the Milky Way speeds through the ever-expanding universe at over 670 million miles per hour, yet no one in history has ever felt a thing. We can feel the slightest breeze on a summer's day, but never one iota of air displacement from these incredible speeds. Heliocentrists claim with a straight face that their ball Earth spins at a constant velocity, dragging the atmosphere in such a manner as to perfectly cancel all centrifugal, gravitational, and inertial forces, so we do not feel the tiniest bit of motion, perturbation, wind, or air resistance. Such backpedaling, damage control, reverse-engineered explanations certainly stretch the limits of credibility in the imagination, leaving much to be desired by discerning minds. David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "Dear reader, do you feel the motion? I trow not, for if you did, you would not so quietly be reading my book. I doubt not you have been, like myself, on a railway platform when an express train rushed wildly past at the rate of 65 miles per hour, when the concussion of the air almost knocked you down. But how much more terrible would be the shock of the Earth's calculated motion 1,000 times faster than the speed of the railway express." Thomas Winship wrote, "Let imagination picture to the mind what force air would have which was set in motion by a spherical body of 8,000 miles in diameter, which in 1 hour was spinning round 1,000 miles per hour, rushing through space at 65,000 miles per hour, and gyrating across the heavens. Then let conjecture endeavor to discover whether the inhabitants on such a globe could keep their hair on. If the Earth globe rotates on its axis at the terrific rate of 1,000 miles per hour, such an immense mass would of necessity cause a tremendous rush of wind in the space it occupied. The wind would go all one way, and anything like clouds which got within the sphere of influence of the rotating sphere would have to go the same way. The fact that the Earth is at rest is proved by kite flying. If the Earth and atmosphere are constantly revolving eastwards at 1,000 miles per hour, how is it that clouds, wind, and weather patterns casually and unpredictably go every which way, often traveling in opposing directions simultaneously? Why can we feel the slightest westward breeze, but not the Earth's incredible supposed 1,000 mile per hour eastward spin? And how is it that the magic velcro of gravity is strong enough to drag miles of Earth's atmosphere along, but weak enough to allow little bugs, birds, clouds, and planes to travel freely unabated in any direction? David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "What about the lark which at early morn soars aloft, trilling its lays of luscious melody? Why was it not swept away in the tumultuous atmosphere? But it still continues singing in happy ignorance of any commotion in the heavens. Who has not noticed on a calm summer day the thistledown floating listlessly in the air, and the smoke ascending straight as an arrow from the peasant's cottage? Would not such light things as thistledown and smoke have to obey the impulse and go with the earth also? But they do not." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "If the atmosphere rushes forward from west to east continually, we are again obliged to conclude that whatever floats or is suspended in it at any altitude must of necessity partake of its eastward motion. A piece of cork or any other body floating in still water will be motionless, but let the water be put in motion in any direction whatever, and the floating bodies will move with it, in the same direction and with the same velocity. Let the experiment be tried in every possible way, and these results will invariably follow. Hence, if the Earth's atmosphere is in constant motion from west to east, all the different strata which are known to exist in it, and all the various kinds of clouds and vapors which float in it, must of mechanical necessity move rapidly eastwards. But what is the fact? If we fix upon any star as a standard or datum outside the visible atmosphere, we may sometimes observe a stratum of clouds going for hours together in a direction the very opposite to that in which the Earth is supposed to be moving. Not only may a stratum of clouds be seen moving rapidly from east to west, but at the same moment other strata may often be seen moving from north to south, or from south to north. It is a fact well known to aeronauts that several strata of atmospheric air are often moving in as many different directions at the same time. On almost any moonlit and cloudy night, different strata may be seen not only moving in different directions, but, at the same time, moving with different velocities, some floating past the face of the moon rapidly and uniformly, and others passing gently along, sometimes becoming stationary, then starting fitfully into motion, and often standing still for minutes together." In his book South Sea Voyages, Arctic and Antarctic explorer Sir James Clark Ross described his experience on the night of November 27, 1839, and his conclusion that the Earth must be motionless. "The sky being very clear, the planet Venus was seen near the zenith, notwithstanding the brightness of the meridian sun. It enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also been observed by former voyagers. Captain Basil Hall witnessed it from the summit of the peak of Tenerife, and Count Strzelecki, on ascending the volcanic mountain of Carenia, in Oahe, reached at 4,000 feet, an elevation above that of the trade wind, and experienced the influence of an opposite current of air of a different hygrometric and thermometric condition. Count Strzelecki further informed me of the following seemingly anomalous circumstance, that at the height of 6,000 feet he found the current of air blowing at right angles to both the lower strata, also of a different hydrometric and thermometric condition, but warmer than the inner stratum. Such a state of the atmosphere is compatible only with the fact which other evidence has demonstrated, that the Earth is at rest." William Carpenter wrote, "It is a well-known fact that clouds are continually seen moving in all manner of direction. Yes, and frequently in different directions at the same time, from west to east being as frequent a direction as any other. Now if the Earth were a globe revolving through space west to east at a rate of 19 miles in a second, the clouds appearing to us to move towards the east would have to move quicker than 19 miles in a second to be thus seen, whilst those which appear to be moving in the opposite direction would have no necessity to be moving at all, since the motion of the earth would be more than sufficient to cause that appearance. But it only takes a little common sense to show us that it is the clouds that move, just as they appear to do, and that therefore the earth is motionless. Heliocentrists believe the world beneath their feet is spinning at a mind-numbing 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, while perfectly pulling the entire atmosphere along for the ride. Meanwhile, at the mid-latitudes of USA and Europe, they believe the world and atmosphere spin around 900 to 700 miles per hour, decreasing gradually all the way down to 0 miles per hour at the North and South Poles, where the stagnant atmosphere apparently never moves, completely escaping the grips of gravity's magic Velcro. This means at all latitudes, every inch of the way, the atmosphere manages to perfectly coincide with the supposed speed of the Earth, compensating from 0 miles per hour at the poles all the way up to 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, and every speed in between. These are all lofty assumptions heliocentrists make without any experimental evidence to back them up. Marshall Hall said, "In short, the sun, moon, and stars are actually doing precisely what everyone throughout all history has seen them do. We do not believe what our eyes tell us because we have been taught a counterfeit system which demands that we believe what has never been confirmed by observation and experiment. That counterfeit system demands that the Earth rotate on an axis every 24 hours at a speed of over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. No one has ever seen or felt such movement, nor seen or felt the 67,000 mile per hour speed of the Earth's alleged orbit around the Sun, or its 500,000 mile per hour alleged speed around a galaxy, or its retreat from an alleged Big Bang at over 670 million miles per hour. Remember, no experiment has ever shown the Earth to be moving. Add to that the fact that the alleged rotational speed we've all been taught as scientific fact must decrease every inch or mile one goes north or south of the equator, and it becomes readily apparent that such things as accurate as aerial bombing in World War II down a chimney from 25,000 feet with a plane going any direction at high speed would have been impossible if calculated on an Earth moving below at several hundred miles per hour and changing constantly with the latitude. Before heliocentric indoctrination, any child will look up to the sky and notice that the sun, moon, and stars all revolve around a stationary Earth. All evidence from our perspective clearly demonstrates that we are fixed, and the heavenly bodies circle around us. We feel the Earth as motionless, and observe the sun, moon, stars, and planets to be moving entities. To suspend this common-sense geocentric perspective and assume that it is actually the Earth rotating beneath us daily while revolving around the sun yearly is quite a theoretical leap to take without any empirical evidence to land on." Alan Daves said, "Ignorant folk think that such minority opinions as geocentrism are conspiracy theories. There is a real conspiracy for sure, but the sad thing is it is mostly a conspiracy of willful and apathetic ignorance for numerous reasons. The very people who would call geocentrists quack conspiracy theorists are either themselves completely ignorant of even modern cosmological axioms and principles of gravitation and mechanics, or they are just playing stupid, hoping no one will notice or call their bluff. What's even more hilarious is the fact that even folk like Stephen Hawking and a few intellectually honest physicists and cosmologists who would read what we are saying and are capable of understanding it know that what we have been saying is absolutely true. Not only do they admit that, but even snicker about it to each other. But they won't dare to address that too openly with the dumb, ignorant masses. Best not to confuse the common folk with unnecessary information and facts. Even more sad are all the others out there who don't have a clue what I'm saying here and shake their heads, thinking they know something about physics that tells them that the Earth moves. If only they studied the textbooks and peer-reviewed papers a little closer, they would realize just how absolutely ignorant with a capital I that argument really is. It is part of the natural physics of water and other fluids to always find their level and remain flat. If disturbed in any way, motion ensues until the flat level is resumed. If dammed up, then released, the nature of all liquids is to quickly flood outwards, taking the easiest course towards finding its new level. From W. T. Lynn's First Principles of Natural Philosophy, The upper surface of a fluid at rest is a horizontal plane, because if a part of the surface were higher than the rest, those parts of the fluid which were under it would exert a greater pressure upon the surrounding parts than they receive from them, so that motion would take place amongst the particles and continue until there were none at a higher level than the rest, that is, until the upper surface of the whole mass of fluid became a horizontal plane. If the Earth is an extended flat plane, then this fundamental physical property of fluids finding and remaining level is consistent with experience and common sense. If, however, the Earth is a giant sphere tilted on its vertical axis, spinning through never-ending space, then it follows that truly flat, consistently level surfaces do not exist here. Moreover, if the Earth is spherical, then it follows that the surface of all Earth's water, including the massive oceans, must maintain a certain degree of convexity. But this is contrary to the fundamental physical nature of water to always be and remain level. From William Thomas Wiseman's The Earth an Irregular Plane. The surface of all water, when not agitated by natural causes, such as winds, tides, earthquakes, etc., is perfectly level. The sense of sight proves this to every unprejudiced and reasonable mind. Can any so-called scientist, who teaches that the earth is a whirling globe, take a heap of liquid water, whirl it around, and so make rotundity? He cannot. Therefore, it is utterly impossible to prove that an ocean is a whirling, rotund section of a globular earth, rushing through space at the lying given rate of false philosophers. If we were living on a whirling ball earth, every pond, lake, marsh, canal, and other large body of standing water, each part would have to comprise a slight arc or semicircle curveting downwards from the central summit. For example, if the ball Earth were 25,000 miles in circumference, as NASA and modern astronomers say, then spherical trigonometry dictates the surface of all standing water must curve downwards an easily measurable 8 inches per mile, multiplied by the square of the distance. This means along a 6-mile channel of standing water, the Earth would dip 6 feet on either end from the central peak. To the benefit of true science, and to the detriment of modern astronomy's pseudoscience, such an experiment can and has been tested. In Cambridge, England, there is a 20-mile canal called the Old Bedford, which passes in a straight line through the fenlands known as the Bedford Level. The water has no interruption from locks or water gates of any kind, and remains stationary, making it perfectly suitable for determining whether any amount of convexity or curvature actually exists. In the latter part of the 19th century, Dr. Samuel Rowbotham, a famous flat earther and author of the fine book Earth, Not a Globe, an experimental inquiry into the true figure of the Earth, proving it a plane without axial or orbital motion and the only material world in the universe, traveled to the Bedford Level and performed a series of experiments to determine whether the surface of standing water is flat or convex. Samuel Rowbotham wrote, "A boat with a flagstaff, the top of the flag 5 feet above the surface of the water, was directed to sail from a place called Welch's Dam, a well-known ferry passage, to another called Welney Bridge. These 2 points are 6 statute miles apart. The author, with a good telescope, went into the water, and with the eye about 8 inches above the surface, observed the receding boat during the whole period required to sail to Welney Bridge. The flag and the boat were distinctly visible throughout the whole distance. There could be no mistake as to the distance passed over, as the man in charge of the boat had instructions to lift one of his oars to the top of the arch the moment he reached the bridge. The experiment commenced about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of a summer's day, and the sun was shining brightly and nearly behind or against the boat during the whole of its passage. Every necessary condition had been fulfilled, and the result was to the last degree definite and satisfactory. The conclusion was unavoidable, that the surface of the water for a length of 6 miles did not to any appreciable extent decline or curvate downwards from the line of sight. But if the Earth is a globe, the surface of the 6 miles length of water would have been 6 feet higher in the center than at the 2 extremities. From this experiment it follows that the surface of standing water is not convex, and therefore that the Earth is not a globe. On the contrary, This simple experiment is all sufficient to prove that the surface of the water is parallel to the line of sight, and is therefore horizontal, and that the earth cannot be other than a plane. In a second experiment, Dr. Robotham placed 7 flags along the edge of the water, each 1 mile distant from the next, with their tops positioned 5 feet above the surface. Near the last one, he also positioned a longer 8-foot staff bearing a 3-foot flag, so that its bottom aligned precisely with the tops of the other flags. He then mounted a telescope at a height of 5 feet behind the first flag and took his observations. If the Earth was a globe of 25,000 miles, each successive flag would have to decline a definite and determined amount below the last. The first and second flags simply established the line of sight. The third flag should then fall 8 inches below the second, the fourth flag 32 inches below, the fifth 6 feet, the sixth 10 feet 8 inches, and the seventh flag should be a clear 16 feet 8 inches below the line of sight. Even if the Earth was a globe of 100,000 miles, an amount of easily measurable curvature should and would still be evident in this experiment. But the reality is, not a single inch of curvature was detected, and the flags all lined up perfectly as consistent with a flat plane. Dr. Robotham wrote, "The rotundity of the Earth would necessitate the above conditions, but as they cannot be found to exist, the doctrine must be pronounced as only a simple theory, having no foundation in fact, a pure invention of misdirected genius, splendid in its comprehensiveness and bearing upon natural phenomena, but nevertheless, mathematical and logical necessities compel its denunciation as an absolute falsehood." Dr. Robotham conducted several other experiments using telescopes, spirit levels, and theodolites, special precision instruments used for measuring angles in horizontal or vertical planes. By positioning them at equal heights, aimed at each other successively, he proved over and over the Earth to be perfectly flat for miles without a single inch of curvature. His findings caused quite a stir in the scientific community, and thanks to 30 years of his efforts, the shape of the Earth became a hot topic of debate around the turn of the 19th century. William Carpenter wrote, "Is water level, or is it not?" was a question once asked of an astronomer. "Practically, yes. Theoretically, no," was the reply. Now, when theory does not harmonize with practice, the best thing to do is to drop the theory. It is getting too late now to say, "so much the worse for the facts." To drop the theory which supposes a curved surface to standing water is to acknowledge the facts. Whenever experiments have been tried on the surface of standing water, the surface has always been found to be level. If the Earth were a globe, the surface of all standing water would be convex. This is an experimental proof that the Earth is not a globe. From the June 26, 1896 edition of the English Mechanic, "Since any given body of water must have a level surface, no one part higher than another, and seeing that all our oceans, a few inland seas excepted, are connected together, it follows that they are all, virtually, of the same level." Astronomers say the magical magnetism of gravity is what keeps all the oceans of the world stuck to the ball Earth. They say that because the Earth is so massive, by virtue of this mass, it creates a magic force able to hold people, oceans, and atmosphere tightly clung to the underside of the spinning ball. Unfortunately, however, they cannot provide any practical example of this on a scale smaller than the planetary. For example, a spinning wet tennis ball has the exact opposite effect of the supposed ball Earth. Any water poured over it simply falls off the sides, and giving it a spin results in water flying off 360 degrees like a dog shaking off after a bath. Astronomers concede the wet tennis ball example displays the opposite effect of their supposed ball Earth, but claim that at some unknown mass, the magic adhesive properties of gravity suddenly kick in, allowing the spinning wet tennis ball Earth to keep every drop of gravitized water stuck to the surface. Again, their theory flies in the face of all practical evidence, but they've been running with it for 500 years, so why stop now? William Carpenter wrote, "If the Earth were a globe, rolling and dashing through space at the rate of 100 miles in 5 seconds of time, the waters of seas and oceans could not, by any known law, be kept on its surface. The assertion that they could be retained under these circumstances being an outrage upon human understanding and credulity. But as the earth, that is, the habitable world of dry land, is found to be standing out of the water and in the water of the mighty deep, whose circumferential boundary is ice, we may throw the statement back into the teeth of those who made it, and flaunt before their faces the flag of reason and common sense, inscribed with the proof that the earth is not a globe. In one portion of its long route, the great river Nile flows for 1,000 miles with a fall of only 1 foot. This is a feat which, of course, would be a sheer impossibility if the earth had spherical curvature. Many other rivers, including the Congo in West Africa, the Amazon in South America, and the Mississippi in North America, all flow for thousands of miles in directions totally incompatible with the supposed globularity of the earth as well. Thomas Winship wrote, "Rivers run down to the sea because of the inclination of their beds. Rising at an altitude above sea level, in some cases thousands of feet above the sea, they follow the easiest route to their level, the sea. The Parana and the Paraguay in South America are navigable for over 2,000 miles, and their waters run the same way until they find their level of stability where the sea tides begin. But if the world be a globe, the Amazon in South America, that flows always in an easterly direction, would sometimes be running uphill and sometimes down, according to the movement of the globe. Then the Congo in West Africa, that always pursues a westerly course to the sea, would in the same manner be running alternately up and down. When that point of the globe exactly between them was up, they would both be running up, although in opposite directions. And when the globe took half a turn, they would both be running down. We know from practical experiment that water will find its level, and cannot by any possibility remain other than level, or flat, or horizontal, whatever term may be used to express the idea. It is therefore quite out of the range of possibility that rivers could do as they would have to do on a globe." David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "miles before it reached the Gulf of Mexico." And William Carpenter wrote, "There are rivers which flow east, west, north, and south. That is, rivers are flowing in all directions over the earth's surface, and at the same time. Now if the earth were a globe, some of these rivers would be flowing uphill and others down, taking it for a fact that there really is an up and down in nature, whatever form she assumes. But since rivers do not flow uphill, and the globular theory requires that they should, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe." Whether at sea level, the top of Mount Everest, or flying 100,000 feet in the air, the always horizontal horizon line always rises up to meet the eye level of the observer and remains perfectly flat. You can test for yourself on a beach or hilltop, in a large field or desert, aboard a hot air balloon or helicopter. You will see the panoramic horizon ascend with you and remain completely level all around. If the earth were actually a big ball, however, the horizon should sink as you ascend, not rise to your eye level, and it would dip at each end of your periphery, not remain flat all around. Standing in a rising balloon, you would have to look downwards to the horizon. The highest point of the ball earth would be directly beneath you and declining on each side. Amateurs have sent balloons to heights of over 121,000 feet, and you can watch video online of the horizon rising with the camera level and remaining perfectly flat 360 degrees around. NASA videos and other official sources, however, such as the recent Red Bull skydive at 128,000 feet, have been caught adding fake curvature to the Earth via wide-angle lenses and post-production work. Panoramic photos atop Mount Everest also often claim to be displaying Earth's curvature, but this is simply the result of distortions and limitations inherent in wide-angle lenses. Samuel Shenton wrote, "The camera-distorted horizons have always been a misleading factor with those who have not freed their minds from the planet or globe Earth indoctrination. 3 or 4 years ago, the USIS booklet Science Horizons carried a note to the effect that the Americans hoped to produce a lens which would not distort level horizons. So far, I am not aware that such aid to truer photography has yet been made available. Flat earthers, however, can prove that due to the known laws of perspective, the horizon optically rises and remains level with the observer's or the camera's eye, no matter what height is achieved. In fact, the Earth immediately beneath balloon, airplane, rocket, or capsule presents a dish-shaped or concave-like appearance, the point of Earth immediately below the vehicle appearing the lowest. It is not the highest point of your globe Earth, with the dip or curvature of the ball sweeping away downward to a horizon far away below the eye level. If the Earth were actually a big ball 25,000 miles in circumference, the horizon would be noticeably curved even at sea level, and everything on or approaching the horizon would appear to tilt backwards slightly from your perspective. Distant buildings along the horizon would all look like leaning towers of Pisa falling away from the observer. A hot air balloon taking off, then drifting steadily away from you on a ball Earth would slowly and constantly appear to lean back more and more the farther away it flew, the bottom of the basket coming gradually into view as the top of the balloon disappears from sight. In reality, however, buildings, balloons, trees, people, anything and everything at right angles to the ground or horizon remains so regardless the distance of the observer. B. Chasbro wrote, "The marine horizon, from whatever position it is viewed, always appears to be, and is, in fact, a perfectly level line, and since this appearance is the same in all parts of the world, its surface must be level, and therefore the earth is a plane. This may be proved to be the case by erecting at a suitable elevation on the seashore a duly leveled board or a string, at right angles to a plumb line, tightly stretched between two vertical poles. On looking towards the sea, the horizontal line for a distance of 20 miles may be easily observed, and throughout its entire length it will be found to coincide with the straight edge or string. But if the earth were a globe, the horizontal line would form an arc of 20 miles in length, curveting both ways from the center, at the rate of 8 inches multiplied by the square of the distance. Hence the horizontal line at either end of the distance ought to be depressed some 66 feet below the horizon in the center. But as no such appearance is ever presented, it necessarily follows that the earth cannot be a globe, or other than a plane. Anyone can prove the sea horizon perfectly straight and the entire earth perfectly flat, using nothing more than a level, tripods, and a wooden plank. At any altitude above sea level, simply fix a 6 to 12 foot long, smooth leveled board edgewise upon tripods, and observe the skyline from eye level behind it. The distant horizon will always align perfectly parallel with the upper edge of the board. Furthermore, if you move in a half circle from one end of the board to the other, whilst observing the skyline over the upper edge, you will be able to trace a clear, flat 10 to 20 miles depending on your altitude. This would be impossible if the earth were a globe and the surface of water convex. If the earth were actually a globe 25,000 miles in circumference, the horizon would align over the center of the board, but then gradually, noticeably, decline towards the extremities. Just 10 miles on each side would necessitate an easily visible curvature of 66.6 feet from each end to the center." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "It is known that the horizon at sea, whatever distance it may extend to the right and left of the observer on land, always appears as a straight line. The following experiment has been tried in various parts of the country. At Brighton, on a rising ground near the race course, 2 poles were fixed in the earth 6 yards apart and directly opposite the sea. Between these poles a line was tightly stretched parallel to the horizon. From the center of the line, the view embraced not less than 20 miles on each side, making a distance of 40 miles. A vessel was observed sailing directly westwards. The line cut the rigging a little above the bulwarks, which it did for several hours or until the vessel had sailed the whole distance of 40 miles. The ship, coming into view from the east, would have to ascend an inclined plane for 20 miles until it arrived at the center of the arc, whence it would have to descend for the same distance. The square of 20 miles, multiplied by 8 inches, gives 266 feet, as the amount the vessel would be below the line at the beginning and at the end of the 40 miles. From the high land near Portsmouth Harbour in Hampshire, England, looking across Spithead to the Isle of Wight, the entire base of the island, where water and land come together, composes a perfectly straight line, 22 statute miles long. According to the ball earth theory, the Isle of Wight should decline 80 feet from the center on each side to account for the necessary curvature. The crosshairs of a good theodolite directed there, however, have repeatedly shown the land and water line to be perfectly level. On a clear day from the high land near Douglas Harbour on the Isle of Man, the whole length of the coast of North Wales is often plainly visible to the naked eye. From the point of Ayr at the mouth of the River Dee to Holyhead comprises a 50-mile stretch, which has also been repeatedly found to be perfectly horizontal. If the Earth actually had curvature of 8 inches per mile squared, as NASA and modern astronomy claim, the 50-mile length of Welsh coast, seen along the horizon in Liverpool Bay, would have to decline from the center point an easily detectable 416 feet on each side. Dr. Samuel Rowbotham wrote, "But as such declination or downward curvation cannot be detected, the conclusion is logically inevitable that it has no existence. Let the reader seriously ask whether any and what reason exists in nature to prevent the fall of more than 500 feet being visible to the eye, or incapable of detection by any optical or mathematical means whatsoever. This question is especially important when it is considered that at the same distance, and on the upper outline of the same land, changes of level of only a few yards extent are quickly and unmistakably perceptible. If a man is guided by evidence and reason, and influenced by a love of truth and consistency, he cannot longer maintain that the earth is a globe. He must feel that to do so is to war with the evidence of his senses, to deny that any importance attaches to the fact and experiment, to ignore entirely the value of logical process, and to cease to rely upon practical induction." Surveyors, engineers, and architects are never required to factor the supposed curvature of the Earth into their projects, providing another proof the world is a plane, not a planet. Canals and railways, for example, are always cut and laid horizontally, often over hundreds of miles, without any allowance for curvature. One surveyor, Mr. T. Westwood, wrote in the January 1896 Earth Review magazine, stating that, "In leveling, I work from ordnance marks, or canal levels, to get the height above sea level. The puzzle to me used to be that over several miles each level was and is treated throughout its whole length as the same level from end to end, not the least allowance being made for curvature. One of the civil engineers in this district, after some amount of argument on each side as to the reason why no allowance for curvature was made, said he did not believe anybody would know the shape of the earth in this life." Another surveyor and engineer of 30 years wrote to the Birmingham Weekly Mercury, February 15, 1890, stating, "I am thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of civil engineering. However bigoted some of our professors may be in the theory of surveying according to the prescribed rules, yet it is well known amongst us that such theoretical measurements are incapable of any practical illustration. All our locomotives are designed to run on what may be regarded as true levels, or flats. There are, of course, partial inclines or gradients here and there, but they are always accurately defined and must be carefully traversed. But anything approaching to 8 inches in the mile, increasing as the square of the distance, could not be worked by any engine that was ever yet constructed. Taking one station with another all over England and Scotland, it may be stated that all the platforms are on the same relative level. The distance between eastern and western coasts of England may be set down as 300 miles. If the prescribed curvature was indeed as represented, the central stations at Rugby or Warwick ought to be close upon 3 miles higher than a cord drawn from the two extremities. If such was the case, there is not a driver or stoker within the kingdom that would be found to take charge of the train. We can only laugh at those of your readers who seriously give us credit for such venturesome exploits as running trains round spherical curves. Horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough. Vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock constructed as at present, physically impossible." Engineer W. Winkler wrote into the Earth Review, October 1893, regarding the Earth's supposed curvature, stating, "As an engineer of many years' standing, I saw that this absurd allowance is only permitted in school books. No engineer would dream of allowing anything of the kind. I have projected many miles of railways and many more of canals, and the allowance has not even been thought of, much less allowed for. This allowance for curvature means this, that it is 8 inches for the first mile of a canal, and increasing at the ratio by the square of the distance in miles. Thus a small navigable canal for boats, say 30 miles long, will have, by the above rule, an allowance for curvature of 600 feet. Think of that, and then please credit engineers as not being quite such fools. Nothing of the sort is allowed. We no more think of allowing 600 feet for a line of 30 miles of railway or canal than of wasting our time trying to square the circle. The Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Gulf of Suez on the Red Sea, is a clear proof of the earth's and water's non-convexity. The canal is 100 miles long, and without any locks, so the water within is an uninterrupted continuation of the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. When it was constructed, the earth's supposed curvature was not taken into account. It was dug along a horizontal datum line, 26 feet below sea level, passing through several lakes from one sea to the other, with the datum line and the water's surface running perfectly parallel over the 100 miles. The average level of the Mediterranean is 6 inches above the Red Sea, while the flood tides in the Red Sea rise 4 feet above the highest and drop 3 feet below the lowest in the Mediterranean, making the half-tide level of the Red Sea the surface of the Mediterranean Sea, and the 100 miles of water in the canal all a clear continuation of the same horizontal line. Were they instead the supposed curved line of globe earthers, the water in the center of the canal would be 1,666 feet above the respective seas on either side. David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "The distance between the Red Sea at Suez and the Mediterranean Sea is 100 statute miles, the datum line of the canal being 26 feet below the level of the Mediterranean, and is continued horizontally the whole way from sea to sea, there not being a single lock on the canal. The surface of water being parallel with the datum line, it is thus clear that there is no curvature or globularity for the whole 100 miles between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Had there been, according to the astronomic theory, the middle of the canal would have been 1,666 feet higher than at either end, whereas the canal is perfectly horizontal for the whole distance. The Great Canal of China, said to be 700 miles in length, was made without regard to any allowance for supposed curvature, as the Chinese believe the earth to be a stationary plane. I may also add that no allowance was made for it in the North Sea Canal, or in the Manchester Ship Canal, both recently constructed, thus clearly proving that there is no globularity in earth or sea, so that the world cannot possibly be a planet." Thomas Winship wrote, "If the earth be the globe of popular belief, it is very evident that in cutting a canal, an allowance must be made for the curvature of the globe, which allowance would correspond to the square of the distance multiplied by 8 inches. From the Age of 5th August 1892, I extract the following. The German Emperor performed the ceremony of opening the gates of the Baltic and North Sea Canal in the spring of 1891. The canal starts at Holtenau, on the south side of Kiel Bay, and joins the Elbe 15 miles above its mouth. It is 61 miles long, 200 feet wide at the surface, and 85 feet at the bottom, the depth being 28 feet. No locks are required, as the surface of the two seas is level. Let those who believe it is the practice for surveyors to make allowance for curvature ponder over the following from the Manchester Ship Canal Company, Earth Review, October 1893. It is customary in railway and canal constructions for all levels to be referred to a datum which is nominally horizontal and is so shown on all sections. It is not the practice in laying out public works to make allowances for the curvature of the earth. The London and North Western Railway forms a straight line 180 miles long between London and Liverpool. The railroad's highest point, midway at Birmingham Station, is only 240 feet above sea level. If the world were actually a globe, however, curvating 8 inches per mile squared, the 180-mile stretch of rail would form an arc, with the center point at Birmingham raising a full 5,400 feet above London and Liverpool. Adding the station's actual height, 240 feet, to its theoretical inclination, 5,400 feet, gives 5,640 feet as the rail's necessary height on a globe Earth, more than 1,000 feet taller than Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in Great Britain. Thomas Winship wrote, "In projecting railways on a globe, the datum line would be the arc of a circle corresponding to the latitude of the place. That the datum line for the railway projections is always a horizontal line proves that the general configuration of the world is horizontal. To support the globe theory, the gentlemen of the observatories should call upon the surveyor to prove that he allows the necessary amount for curvature. But this is what the learned men dare not do, as it is well known that the allowance for the supposed curvature is never made." David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "In a long line like that of the Great Pacific Railway, extending across North America, the supposed curvature would, of course, be proportionally great, extending to many miles in height, but not 1 inch was allowed by the engineers for curvature during the whole course of the construction of that vast line of railway. And if we think of it, how could it be otherwise? All railway metals must of necessity be straight, for how could any engine or carriage run with safety on a convex surface?" J.C. Bourne, in his book The History of the Great Western Railway, stated that the entire original English railroad, more than 118 miles long, that the whole line with the exception of the inclined planes, may be regarded practically as level. The British Parliament session in 1862 that approved its construction recorded in Order No. 44 for the proposed railway that "the section be drawn to the same horizontal scale as the plan, and to a vertical scale of not less than 1 inch to every 100 feet, and shall show the surface of the ground marked on the plan, the intended level of the proposed work, the height of every embankment, and the depth of every cutting, and a datum horizontal line which shall be the same throughout the whole length of the work." Thomas Winship wrote, 118 miles of level railway, and yet the surface on which it is projected a globe? Impossible. It cannot be. Early in 1898 I met a Mr. Hughes, chief officer of the steamer City of Lincoln. This gentleman told me he had projected thousands of miles of level railway in South America, and never heard of any allowance for curvature being made. On one occasion he surveyed over 1,000 miles of railway, which was a perfect straight line all the way. It is well known that in the Argentine Republic and other parts of South America there are railways thousands of miles long, without curve or gradient. In projecting railways, the world is acknowledged to be a plane, and if it were a globe, the rules of projection have yet to be discovered. Level railways prove a level world, to the utter confusion of the globular school of impractical men with high salaries and little brains. That in all surveys no allowance is made for curvature, which would be a necessity on a globe, that a horizontal line is in every case the datum line, the same line being continuous throughout the whole length of the work, and that the theodolite cuts a line at equal altitudes on either side of it, which altitude is the same as that of the instrument, clearly proves, to those who will accept proof when it is furnished, that the world is a plane and not a globe. If the earth were a sphere, airplane pilots would have to constantly correct their altitudes downwards so as to not fly straight off into outer space. If the earth were truly a sphere 25,000 miles in circumference, curvating 8 inches per mile squared, a pilot wishing to simply maintain their altitude at a typical cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet, over half a mile, every minute. Otherwise, without compensation, in 1 hour's time, the pilot would find themselves 166,666 feet, 31.5 miles, higher than expected. A plane flying at a typical 35,000 feet, wishing to maintain that altitude at the upper rim of the so-called troposphere in 1 hour, would find themselves over 200,000 feet high in the mesosphere, with a steadily raising trajectory the longer they go. I have talked to several pilots, and no such compensation for the Earth's supposed curvature is ever made. When pilots set an altitude, their artificial horizon gauge remains level, and so does their course. Nothing like the necessary 2,777 foot per minute declination is ever taken into consideration. Thomas Winship wrote, "It must be obvious to the reader that if the earth be the globe of popular belief, the rules observed for navigating a vessel from one part of this globe to another must be in conformity to its figure. The datum line in navigation would be an arc of a circle, and all computations would be based on the convexity of water and worked out by spherical trigonometry. Let me preface my remarks on the important branch of our subject by stating that at sea the datum line is always a horizontal line. Spherical trigonometry is never used, and not 1 out of 1,000 shipmasters understands spherical trigonometry. Airline pilots and sea navigators fly and sail as though the Earth were a plane. Pilots reach their desired altitude and maintain it effortlessly for hours, never contending with anything like the 2,777 feet per minute of forced inclination due to Earth's supposed curvature. Similarly, ship captains in navigating great distances at sea never need to factor the supposed curvature of the Earth into their calculations. Both plain sailing and great circle sailing, the most popular navigation methods, use plane, not spherical trigonometry. From Navigation and Nautical Astronomy, plain sailing is usually defined to be the art of navigating a ship on the supposition that the Earth is a plane. Even when longitude enters into consideration, it is still with the plane triangle only that we have to deal. But as the investigation here given in the text shows, the rules for plain sailing would equally hold good though the surface were a plane. Thomas Winship wrote, "It must be evident to everyone who understands what a triangle is, that the base of any such figure on a globe would be an arc of a circle, of which the center would be the center of the globe. Thus, instead of a plane triangle, the figure would contain one plane angle and two spherical angles. Hence, if the plane triangle is what we have to deal with, and such is the case, the base of the triangle would be a straight line, the ocean. That all triangulation used at sea is plane proves that the sea is a plane. The foregoing quotation states that a plane triangle is used for a spherical surface, but the rules for plane sailing would equally hold good though the surface were a plane. What fine reasoning! It is like saying that the rules for describing a circle are those used for drawing a square, but they would equally hold good though the figure were a square. Plain sailing is navigating a ship making all mathematical calculations on the assumption that the Earth is perfectly flat. If the Earth were, in fact, a sphere, such an errant assumption would lead to constant glaring inaccuracies, and the necessity for using spherical trigonometry would become obvious. Plain sailing has worked perfectly fine in both theory and practice for thousands of years, however, and plane trigonometry has time and again proven more accurate than spherical trigonometry in determining distances across the oceans. It is so commonly used at sea. Navigation in Theory and Practice states that, in practice, scarcely any other rules are used but those derived from plain sailing. The great and serious objection to plain sailing is that longitude cannot be found by it accurately, although in practice it is more frequently found by it than any other method. So both latitude and longitude are found most often and most accurately by assuming the Earth to be flat, more accurately even than assuming the Earth to be spherical. Thomas Winship wrote, "Plain sailing proves that the surface of water is a plane or horizontal surface, and in practice it is shown that this plane extends for many thousands of miles. Whether the voyage is outwards or homewards makes no difference, thus showing that a short voyage to the Cape and back to England can be accomplished by plain sailing. The fact that water is flat like a sheet of paper, when undisturbed by wind and tide, is my working anchor, and the powerful ground tackle of all those who reject the delusions of modern theoretical astronomy. Prove water to be convex, and we will at once and forever recant and grant you anything you like to demand." William Carpenter wrote, "If the Earth were a globe, a small model globe would be the very best, because the truest thing for the navigator to take to sea with him. But such a thing as that is not known. With such a toy as a guide, the mariner would wreck his ship of a certainty. This is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. As the mariner's compass points north and south at one and the same time, and a meridian is a north and south line, it follows that meridians can be no other than straight lines. But since all meridians on a globe are semicircles, it is an incontrovertible proof that the Earth is not a globe." And David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "The needle of this most important instrument is straight, its two ends pointing north and south at the same time. Consequently, the meridians must also be straight lines, whereas on a globe they are semicircles. Even at the equator, the needle points straight, which would be impossible, were that the midway of a vast convex globe, as in such case the one end would dip towards the north, and the other be pointed towards the sky. Again, the navigator, when he goes to sea, takes his observations and relies on the compass to guide him as to the direction in which he wishes to proceed. He does not provide himself with the model of a globe, which, if the world were a globe, would surely be the safest plan for him to adopt, but he takes flat maps or charts. Thus, in practice, he sails his ship as if the sea were horizontal, though in theory he had been erroneously taught that it is convex. In the flat Earth model of the cosmos, the North Pole is the immovable center of the world and the entire universe. Polaris, the North Star, sits straight over the North Pole, at the highest point in the heavens, and like a slowly rotating planetarium dome, all the celestial bodies revolve around Polaris and over the Earth once per day. The Sun circles over and around the circumference of Earth every 24 hours, steadily traveling each day from the equator during the March vernal equinox up to the Tropic of Cancer at the June summer solstice, back down to the equator for the September autumnal equinox, and all the way down to the Tropic of Capricorn on the December winter solstice. In the flat Earth model, the South Pole does not exist at all, and Antarctica is instead a gigantic ice wall extending the circumference of Earth, holding in the oceans like a giant bowl or a World Cup. As strange as this concept may sound at first, it is a fact that if you set a bearing due south from anywhere on Earth, inevitably at or before 78 degrees southern latitude, you will find yourself face to face with an enormous ice wall towering 100 to 200 feet in the air, extending to the east and west the entire circumference of the world. General Greely in Antarctica, or the Hypothetical Southern Continent, wrote, "The ice barrier, so frequently referred to in accounts of the Antarctic regions, is the forefront of the enormous glacier covering or ice cap, which, accumulating in vast undulating fields from the heavy snowfall, and ultimately attaining hundreds if not thousands of feet in thickness, creeps from the continent of Antarctica into the polar sea. The ice barrier, yet a part of the parent ice cap, presents itself to the navigator who has boldness enough to approach its fearful front as a solid perpendicular wall of marble-like ice, ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 feet in thickness, of which from 100 to 200 feet rises above, and from 800 to 1,800 feet sinks below the level of the sea." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "It has been demonstrated that the Earth is a plane, the surface center of which is immediately underneath the star called Polaris, and the extremities of which are bounded by a vast region of ice and water and irregular masses of land. The whole terminates in fog and darkness, where snow and driving hail, piercing sleet, and boisterous winds, howling storms, madly mounting waves, and clashing icebergs are almost constant. Antarctica is not the tiny ice continent found confined to the underside antipode of astronomers' globes. Quite the contrary, Antarctica literally surrounds us 360 degrees, encircles every continent, and acts as a barrier holding in the oceans. The most commonly asked questions, and the greatest mysteries yet to be solved are, how far does the Antarctic ice extend outwards? Is there a limit? What lies beyond, or is it just snow and ice forever? Thanks to UN treaties and constant military surveillance, the North Pole and Antarctica remain cloaked in government secrecy, both purported no-fly and no-sail zones, with several reports of civilian pilots and captains being shooed away and escorted back under threats of violence. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "How far the ice extends, how it terminates, and what exists beyond it, are questions to which no present human experience can reply. All we at present know is that snow and hail, howling winds, and indescribable storms and hurricanes prevail, and that in every direction human ingress is barred by unsealed escarpments of perpetual ice, extending farther than the eye or telescope can penetrate, and becoming lost in gloom and darkness." Before reaching the Antarctic ice wall, Navigating the increasingly tumultuous southern oceans, explorers encounter the longest, darkest, coldest nights and the most dangerous seas and storms anywhere on Earth. Vasco da Gama, an early 16th century Portuguese explorer of the South Seas, wrote how the waves rise like mountains in height, ships are heaved up to the clouds and apparently precipitated by circling whirlpools to the bed of the ocean. The winds are piercing cold, and so boisterous that the pilot's voice can seldom be heard, whilst a dismal and almost continual darkness adds greatly to the danger. In 1773, Captain Cook became the first modern explorer known to have breached the Antarctic Circle and reached the ice barrier. During 3 voyages lasting 3 years and 8 days, Captain Cook and his crew sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall. Captain Cook wrote, "The ice extended east and west far beyond the reach of our sight, while the southern half of the horizon was illuminated by rays of light, which were reflected from the ice to a considerable height. It was indeed my opinion that this ice extends quite to the pole, or perhaps joins some land to which it has been fixed since creation." On October 5, 1839, another explorer, James Clark Ross, began a series of Antarctic voyages lasting a total of 4 years and 5 months. Ross and his crew sailed 2 heavily armored warships thousands of miles, losing many men from hurricanes and icebergs, looking for an entry point beyond the southern glacial wall. Upon first confronting the massive barrier, Captain Ross wrote of the wall, "Extending from its eastern extreme point as far as the eye could discern to the eastward, it presented an extraordinary appearance, gradually increasing in height as we got nearer to it, and proving at length to be a perpendicular cliff of ice, between 150 feet and 200 feet above the level of the sea, perfectly flat and level at the top, and without any fissures or promontories on its even seaward face. We might with equal chance of success try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as penetrate such a mass." William Carpenter wrote, "Yes, but we can circumnavigate the south easily enough, is often said by those who don't know. The British ship Challenger recently completed the circuit of the southern region, indirectly to be sure, but she was 3 years about it, and traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times round on the globular hypothesis." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "If we now consider the fact that when we travel by land or sea, and from any part of the known world in a direction towards the North Polar Star, we shall arrive at one and the same point, we are forced to the conclusion that what has hitherto been called the North Polar region is really the center of the earth, that from this northern center the land diverges and stretches out, of necessity, towards a circumference, which must now be called the southern region, which is a vast circle, and not a pole or center. In this and other ways, all the great navigators have been frustrated in their efforts, and have been more or less confounded in their attempts to sail round the earth, upon or beyond the Antarctic Circle. But if the southern region is a pole or center, like the north, there would be little difficulty in circumnavigating it, for the distance round would be comparatively small. When it is seen that the earth is not a sphere, but a plane, having only one center, the north, and that the south is the vast icy boundary of the world, the difficulties experienced by circumnavigators can be easily understood. If the earth were truly a globe, then every line of latitude south of the equator would have to measure a gradually smaller and smaller circumference the farther south traveled. In other words, the circumference at 10 degrees south latitude would comprise a smaller circle than at the equator, 20 degrees south latitude would comprise a circle smaller than 10, and so on. If, however, the earth is an extended plane, then every line of latitude south of the equator should measure a gradually larger and larger circumference the farther south traveled. 10 degrees south latitude will comprise a larger circle than the equator, 20 degrees south latitude will comprise a circle larger than 10, and so on. Likewise, if the earth were a globe, lines of longitude would bubble out at the equator while converging at the poles, whereas if earth is an extended plane, lines of longitude should simply expand straight outwards from the North Pole. So which is actually the case? David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "Upon the principle as taught by Scripture and common observation that the world is not a planet but consists of vast masses of land stretched out upon level seas, the north being the center of the system, it is evident that the degrees of longitude will gradually increase in width the whole way from the north center to the icy boundary of the great southern circumference, in consequence of the difference between the actual extent of longitudes and that allowed for them by the nautical authorities, which difference, at the latitude of the Cape of Good Hope, has been estimated to amount to a great number of miles. Many shipmasters have lost their reckoning, and many vessels have been wrecked. Ship captains, who have been educated in the globular theory, know not how to account for their getting so much out of their course in southern latitudes, and generally put it down to currents. But this reason is futile, for although currents may exist, they do not usually run in opposite directions, and vessels are frequently wrecked whether sailing east or west." During Captain James Clark Ross's voyages around the Antarctic circumference, he often wrote in his journal, perplexed at how they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside their reckoning every day, some days as much as 29 miles. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition to the Antarctic from August 18, 1838 to June 10, 1842, almost 4 years spent exploring and surveying the Southern Ocean. In his journals, Lieutenant Wilkes also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "The commanders of these various expeditions were, of course, with their education and belief in the earth's rotundity, unable to conceive of any other cause for the differences between log and chronometer results than the existence of currents. But one simple fact is entirely fatal to such an explanation, that when the route taken is east or west, the same results are experienced. The water of the southern region cannot be running in two opposite directions at the same time, and hence, although various local and variable currents have been noticed, they cannot be shown to be the cause of the discrepancies so generally observed in high southern latitudes between time and log results. The conclusion is one of necessity, forced upon us by the sum of the evidence collected that the degrees of longitude in any given southern latitude are larger than the degrees in any latitude nearer to the northern center, thus proving the already more than sufficiently demonstrated fact that the earth is a plane, having a northern center, in relation to which degrees of latitude are concentric, and from which degrees of longitude are diverging lines, continually increasing in their distance from each other as they are prolonged towards the great glacial southern circumference." Reverend Thomas Milner wrote, "In the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845. How came Her Majesty's ship Conqueror to be lost? How have so many other noble vessels, perfectly sound, perfectly manned, perfectly navigated, been wrecked in calm weather, not only in dark night or in a fog, but in broad daylight and sunshine, in the former case upon the coasts, in the latter upon sunken rocks, from being out of reckoning, under circumstances which until now have baffled every satisfactory explanation? The equatorial circumference of the supposed ball earth is said to be 24,900 statute, or 21,600 nautical miles. A nautical mile is the distance following the supposed curvature of the earth from 1 minute of latitude to the next. A statute mile is the straight line distance between the two, not taking into account Earth's alleged curvature. The Australian Handbook Almanac Shippers and Importers Directory states that the distance between Sydney and Nelson is 1,400 nautical or 1,633 statute miles, allowing a more than sufficient 83 miles as the distance for rounding Cape Farewell and sailing up Tasman Bay to Nelson, leaves 1,550 statute miles as the straight line distance from the meridian of Sydney to the meridian of Nelson. Their given difference in longitude is 22 degrees, 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Therefore, if 22 degrees 2 minutes 14 seconds out of 360 is 1,550 miles, the entirety measures 25,182 miles. This is larger than the Earth is said to be at the equator, and 4,262 miles greater than it would be at Sydney's southern latitude on a globe of said proportions. 1/360th part of 25,182 gives 70 miles as the distance between each degree of longitude at Sydney's 34° southern latitude. On a globe 25,000 miles in equatorial circumference, however, degrees of longitude at 34 degrees latitude would be only 58 miles, a full 12 miles per degree less than reality. This perfectly explains why Ross and other navigators in the deep south experienced 12-plus mile daily discrepancies between their reckoning and reality. The farther south traveled, the farther the divide. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "From near Cape Horn, Chile, to Port Phillip in Melbourne, Australia, the distance is 9,000 miles. These two places are 143 degrees of longitude from each other. Therefore the whole extent of the Earth's circumference is a mere arithmetical question. If 143 degrees make 9,000 miles, what will be the distance made by the whole 360 degrees into which the surface is divided? The answer is 22,657 miles, or 8,357 miles more than the theory of rotundity would permit. It must be borne in mind, however, that the above distances are nautical measure, which, reduced to statute miles, gives the actual distance round the southern region at a given latitude as 26,433 statute miles, or nearly 1,500 miles more than the largest circumference ever assigned to the Earth at the equator. Similar calculations made from the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, to Melbourne, Australia, at an average latitude of 35.5 degrees south, have given an approximate figure of over 25,000 miles, which is again equal to or greater than the Earth's supposed greatest circumference at the equator. Calculations from Sydney, Australia, to Wellington, New Zealand, at an average of 37.5 degrees south, have given an approximate circumference of 25,500 miles, greater still. According to the ball earth theory, the circumference of the Earth at 37.5 degrees southern latitude should be only 19,757 statute miles, almost 6,000 miles less than such practical measurements. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "The above calculations are, as already stated, only approximate, but as liberal allowances have been made for irregularities of route, etc., they are sufficiently accurate to prove that the degrees of longitude, as we proceed southwards, do not diminish, as they would upon a globe, but expand or increase, as they must if the Earth is a plane, or, in other words, the farthest point, or greatest latitude south, must have the greatest circumference and degrees of longitude." And William Carpenter wrote, "Parallels of latitude only, of all imaginary lines on the surface of the Earth, are circles, which increase progressively from the northern center to the southern circumference. The mariner's course in the direction of any one of these concentric circles is his longitude, the degrees of which increase to such an extent beyond the equator, going southwards, that hundreds of vessels have been wrecked because of the false idea created by the untruthfulness of the charts and the globular theory together, causing the sailor to be continually getting out of his reckoning. With a map of the Earth in its true form, all difficulty is done away with, and ships may be conducted anywhere with perfect safety. This, then, is a very important practical proof that the Earth is not a globe."
I phoned up Antarctica. There's like a tourist umbrella you have to go through, and I sort of said, "Oh, I've got loads of money. I've got boats in Hawaii and India," which I don't. And me and some friends were going to hack down to Antarctica and walk across it. And I got loads of emails off these people saying, "No, you don't. No, you don't. Fill out your permits. You've got Orange membership. Fill out this. Why are you coming?" I got like totally hammered just for saying I'm coming to Antarctica. What I found is you're only allowed in through New Zealand, South America at the bottom, and South Africa at the bottom. And they take you in, you see some penguins, you sleep somewhere cold, and they throw you back out, all for like $5,000. Now, it's totally locked down, and I did an article about it where I looked at the Treaty of Antarctica, which is some countries got together and locked it down. They've got a lot of science research going on there, and they just don't let anyone in. Now, where this treaty meet, they have a big table that's shaped in a pyramid with the top cut off, which is, you can call me a conspiracy theorist, but there's obviously something there. What would you like to add on the Antarctica rim model, Eric?
Yeah, so Antarctica is not just the tiny ice continent on the bottom of the globe that it shows, but it is the case that no matter where you are on Earth, if you go southwards from there, you'll hit Antarctica. So if you imagine expanding that little Antarctic continent on the bottom of the globe out to an ice rim all the way across, around the Earth, the North Pole being in the center, anywhere you go in a straight line, you will end up going to the ice wall.
Yeah, and many boats through, since the 40s, 50s have talked about my instruments went crazy, there were ice walls for hundreds of miles, I got lost. There's so many of these stories.
Yeah, and so they say that there's a South Pole somewhere too on part of that guided tour that you're talking about. They've got an arbitrary point along the Antarctic ice that they've put a red and white barbershop pole with a ball earth on top of it and claim that that's the South Pole. But they even admit that it's not the real South Pole because the real geomagnetic South Pole is constantly moving. So since it's constantly moving, you're never really going to be able to see it. But the reality is they can't have people going down there with a compass and checking to see if it really is the South Pole.
Last year, Prince Harry was down there, and he basically just made some filming. He was with Rupert and Tarquin and a few of his friends, and the story was, it was on all the mainstream news, Prince Harry in Antarctica. Oh, we had to go back, it was just too cold, my foot got blisters and frostbite. What the message to the subconscious is, it doesn't matter how rich you are, don't go there, it's too cold.
They know that Prince Harry and a team of injured servicemen and women have been walking to the South Pole. Well, they've got there, they've completed the 200-mile Walking with the Wounded South Pole Challenge, that's its proper name. They've spent more than 3 weeks trekking through Antarctica, and this was what it sounded like at the moment when they arrived at the bottom of the world.
Let's go!
Oh, it sounds quite restrained, doesn't it, after all that effort? Well, they spent 20 hours in a cold chamber. This was the prince and the other competitors who were with him to prepare for the conditions that they were going to find down there. The expedition was supposed to be a race. You might remember it being billed that way before it started, but the weather became so bad as they went along that they scrapped the competitive side of things and just joined up as one big team instead. And this was how Harry reacted after completing the mission.
We're here, we made it. It's Friday 13th. We've had so many things go against us. We've had beautiful weather, but bad weather before, and bad terrain and injuries and stuff like that. But everyone's made it, all 12 of them, the whole group of 20, whatever it is. But the 12 wounded soldiers have made it. Couldn't have made it without everyone's help, especially back home. The founders, Ed and Simon as well. But everyone is so happy. Everyone's touched the ball. We've all had photos. We've all had hugs, a few tears here and there. But all in all, mission success, basically.
If you're wondering about that ball that he was talking about, it's the ceremonial South Pole at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. It's like a metal sphere on a red and white pole, and it's partly surrounded by the flags of the signatories of the Antarctic Treaty. So it's lovely for a photo, but the problem with it is it's not the real South Pole. It's about 300 metres away.
So at the real South Pole, what is that?
Well, there's nothing. That's the thing. You can't see. To do it properly, to cover all your bases, you have to do both. You have to do the picture with the ball, and then you have to go and kind of hang around at the exact
why don't they move
longitude
the
and
ball to where
latitude.
the actual thing is?
Well, that's a very sensible question. It's not one I can answer, but it's a very good.
If the Earth were truly a globe, the Arctic and Antarctic polar regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator should share similar conditions and characteristics such as comparable temperatures, seasonal changes, length of daylight, plant and animal life. In reality, however, the Arctic and Antarctic regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator differ greatly in many ways. Thomas Winship says, If the Earth be the globe of popular belief, the same amount of heat and cold, summer and winter, should be experienced at the same latitudes north and south of the equator. The same number of plants and animals would be found, and the same general conditions exist. That the very opposite is the case disproves the globular assumption. The great contrasts between places at the same latitudes north and south of the equator is a strong argument against the received doctrine of the rotundity of the Earth. Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of approximately negative 57 degrees Fahrenheit and a record low of 135.8. The average annual temperature at the North Pole, however, is a comparatively warm 4 degrees. Throughout the year, temperatures in the Antarctic vary less than half the amount at comparable Arctic latitudes. The northern Arctic region enjoys moderately warm summers and manageable winters, whereas the southern Antarctic region never even warms enough to melt the perpetual snow and ice. Thomas Winship wrote, "This uniformity of temperature partly accounts for the great accumulation of ice which is formed, not on account of the great severity of the winter, but because there is practically no summer to melt it. In the Antarctic there is eternal winter, and snow never melts. As far north as a man has traveled, he has found reindeer and hare basking in the sun, and country brilliant with rich flora. Within the Antarctic Circle, no plant is to be found." The island of Kerguelen at 49 degrees southern latitude has only 18 species of native plants that can survive its hostile climate. Compare this with the island of Iceland at 65 degrees northern latitude, 16 degrees further north of the equator than Kerguelen is south, yet Iceland is home to 870 species of native plants. On the Isle of Georgia, just 54 degrees southern latitude, the same latitude as Canada or England in the north, where dense forests of various tall trees abound, the infamous Captain Cook wrote that he was unable to find a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. Cook wrote, "Not a tree was to be seen. The lands which lie to the south are doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, never to feel the warmth of the sun's rays, whose horrible and savage aspect I have not words to describe. Even marine life is sparse in certain tracts of vast extent, and the sea-bird is seldom observed flying over such lonely wastes. The contrasts between the limits of organic life in Arctic and Antarctic zones is very remarkable and significant. Vegetables and land animals are found at nearly 80 degrees in the north, while from the parallel of 58 degrees in the south, the lichen and such-like plants only clothe the rocks, and seabirds and the cetaceous tribes alone are seen upon the desolate beaches." In the Arctic there are 4 clearly distinguished seasons, warm summers, and an abundance of plant and animal life, none of which can be said of the Antarctic. The Eskimo live as far north as the 79th parallel, whereas in the south no native man is found higher than the 56th. Admiral Ferdinand von Wrangel, the 19th century Russian Arctic explorer, wrote how in the north countless herds of reindeer, elks, black bears, foxes, sable, and gray squirrels fill the upland forests. Stone foxes and wolves roam over the low ground. Enormous flights of swans, geese, and ducks arrive in spring, and seek deserts where they may molt and build their nests in safety. Eagles, gulls, and owls pursue their prey along the sea coast. Ptarmigan run in troops among the bushes. Little snipes are busy among the brooks and in the morasses. The social crows seek the neighborhood of man's habitations, and when the sun shines in spring, one may sometimes even hear the cheerful note of the finch, and in autumn that of the thrush. W.N.R. Chambers, in Arctic Explorations, wrote, "Beyond the 70th degree of southern latitude, not a tree meets the eye. Wearied with the white waste of snow, forests, woods, even shrubs have disappeared, and given place to a few lichens and creeping woody plants, which scantily clothe the indurated soil. Still, in the farthest north, nature claims her birthright of beauty, and in the brief and rapid summer she brings forth numerous flowers and grasses to bloom for a few days, to be again blasted by the swiftly recurring winter. The rapid fervor of an Arctic summer had already, June 1st, converted the snowy waste into luxuriant pasture ground, rich in flowers and grass, with almost the same lively appearance as that of an English meadow." In New Zealand, situated at 42 degrees southern latitude, On the winter solstice, the sun rises at 4:31 a.m. and sets at 7:29 p.m., making the longest day of the year 14 hours and 58 minutes. On the summer solstice, the New Zealand sun rises at 7:29 a.m. and sets at 4:31 p.m., making the shortest day 9 hours and 2 minutes long. Meanwhile, in England, a full 10 degrees farther north of the equator than New Zealand lies south, the longest day is 16 hours and 34 minutes, the shortest day 7 hours and 45 minutes. Therefore, the longest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 36 minutes shorter than the longest day in England, and the shortest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 17 minutes longer than the shortest day in England. William Swainson, an Englishman who emigrated and became Attorney General of New Zealand in the mid-19th century, lived in both countries for decades and wrote of their differences, stating, "The range of temperature is limited, there being no excess of either heat or cold. Compared with the climate of England, the summer of New Zealand is but very little warmer, though considerably longer. Even in summer, people here have no notion of going without fires in the evening. But then, though the days are very warm and sunny, the nights are always cold. For 7 months last summer, we had not one day that the sun did not shine as brilliantly as it does in England in the finest day in June, and though it has more power here, the heat is not nearly so oppressive. But then there is not the twilight which you get in England. Here it is light till about 8 o'clock, then in a few minutes it becomes too dark to see anything, and the change comes over in almost no time. The seasons are the reverse of those in England. Spring commences in September, summer in December, autumn in April, and winter in June. The days are an hour shorter at each end of the day in summer, and an hour longer in the winter than in England." In the flat Earth model of the cosmos, these Arctic and Antarctic phenomena are easily accounted for and exactly what would be expected. If the sun circles over and around the Earth every 24 hours, steadily traveling from tropic to tropic every 6 months, it follows that the northern, central region would annually receive far more heat and sunlight than the southern circumferential region. Since the sun must sweep over the larger southern region in the same 24 hours it has to pass over the smaller northern region, its passage must necessarily be proportionally faster as well. This is why the Antarctic morning dawn and evening twilight are very abrupt, whereas in extreme north, twilight continues for hours after sunset, and many midsummer nights the sun does not set at all. Dr. Samuel Robotham said, "If the sun is fixed and the earth revolves underneath it, the same phenomena would exist at the same distance on each side of the equator. But such is not the case. What can operate to cause the twilight in New Zealand to be so much more sudden, or the nights so much colder than in England? The southern hemisphere cannot revolve more rapidly than the northern. The latitudes are about the same, and the distance round a globe would be the same at 50 degrees south as at 50 degrees north, and as the whole would revolve once in 24 hours, the surface at the two places would pass underneath the sun with the same velocity, and the light would approach in the morning and recede in the evening in exactly the same manner. Yet the very contrary is the fact. The constant sunlight of the north develops, with the utmost rapidity, numerous forms of vegetable life, and furnishes subsistence for millions of living creatures. But in the south, where the sunlight never dwells, or lingers about a central region, but rapidly sweeps over sea and land, to complete in 24 hours the great circle of the southern circumference, it has not time to excite and stimulate the surface, and therefore, even in comparatively low southern latitudes, everything wears an aspect of desolation. These differences in the north and south could not exist if the earth were a globe, turning upon axes underneath a non-moving sun. The two hemispheres would at the same latitudes have the same degree of light and heat, and the same general phenomena, both in kind and degree. The peculiarities which are found in the south as compared with the north are only such as could exist upon a stationary plane, having a northern center, concentric with which is the path of the moving sun." And William Carpenter wrote, "Every year the sun is as long south of the equator as he is north, and if the earth were not stretched out as it is, in fact, but turned under, as the Newtonian theory suggests, it would certainly get as intensive a share of the sun's rays south as north. But the southern region being, in consequence of the fact stated, far more extensive than the region north, The Sun, having to complete his journey round every 24 hours, travels quicker as he goes further south, from September to December, and his influence has less time in which to accumulate at any given point. Since, then, the facts could not be as they are if the Earth were a globe, it is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. During Arctic summer, from approximately the 22nd to the 25th of June, at a high enough latitude and altitude, you can watch a phenomenon known as the midnight sun, where the sun stays continuously visible in the sky for 3 days straight. The midnight sun rises on the 22nd, and for the next 72 hours never disappears from sight, slowly ascending and descending every 12 hours, showing 3 brilliant sunsets and sunrises without ever actually setting below the horizon. In the Brighton Examiner of July 1870, United States Ambassador to Norway Mr. Campbell described his experience witnessing the midnight sun with a group of gentlemen on a cliff 1,000 feet above the Arctic Sea at the 69th north parallel. It was late but still sunlight. The Arctic Ocean stretched away in silent vastness at our feet. The sound of the waves scarcely reached our airy lookout. Away in the north the huge old sun swung low along the horizon, like the slow beat of the tall clock in our grandfather's parlor corner. We all stood silently, looking at our watches. When both hands stood together at 12 midnight, the full round orb hung triumphantly above the waves. A bridge of gold running due north spangled the water between us and him. There he shone in silent majesty, which knew no setting. We involuntarily took off our hats. No word was said. Combine the most brilliant sunrise you ever saw, and its beauties will pall before the gorgeous coloring which lit up the ocean, heaven, and mountains. In half an hour the sun had swung up perceptibly on its beat. The colors had changed to those of morning. A fresh breeze had rippled over the florid sea. One songster after another piped out of the ground behind us. We had slid into another day. From the land of the midnight sun. Tourists from Haparanda prefer going to Ayasaksa, a hill 680 feet above the sea, from which, through 8 or 10 miles south of the Arctic Circle, they can see the midnight sun for 3 days. As the voyage drew to a close, and we approached the upper end of the Gulf of Bothnia, the twilight had disappeared, and between the setting and rising of the sun hardly 1 hour elapsed. Haparanda is in 65 degrees 31 minutes north latitude and 41 miles south of the Arctic Circle. It is 1 degree 18 minutes farther north than Archangel and in the same latitude as the most northern part of Iceland. The sun rises on the 21st of June at 12:01 a.m. and sets at 11:37 p.m. From the 22nd to the 25th of June, the traveler may enjoy the sight of the midnight sun from Avasaksa, a hill 680 feet high and about 45 miles distant. If the Earth were actually a spinning globe revolving around the sun, the only place such a phenomena as the midnight sun could be observed would be at the poles. Any other vantage point from 89 degrees latitude downwards could never, regardless of any tilt or inclination, see the sun for 24 hours straight. To see the sun for an entire revolution on a spinning globe at a point other than the poles, you would have to be looking through miles and miles of land and sea for part of the revolution. Anyone below the 89th parallel could never witness the sun for 72 hours, 3 whole revolutions, straight, because to do so would be to assume you are somehow seeing through the globe and to the sun on the other side. Since such an assumption is ridiculous, and yet the midnight sun can clearly be seen as low as the 65th parallel, this is another absolute proof that the Earth is the flat, stationary center of the universe. Thomas Winship wrote, "If the Earth be a globe, at midnight the eye would have to penetrate thousands of miles of land and water, even at 65 degrees north latitude, in order to see the sun at midnight. That the sun can be seen for days together in the far north during the northern summer proves that there is something very seriously wrong with the globular hypothesis. Besides this, how is it that the midnight sun is never seen in the south during the southern summer? Cook penetrated as far south as 71 degrees, Weddell in 1893 reached as far as 74 degrees, and Sir James C. Ross in 1841 and 1842 reached the 78th parallel. But I am not aware that any of these navigators have left it on record that the sun was seen at midnight in the south." Heliocentrists also cannot explain why the midnight sun phenomena is not experienced anywhere in the southern hemisphere at any time of year. Quite to the contrary, it has been recorded by the Royal Belgian Geographical Society in Expedition Antarctique Belge that during the most severe part of the Antarctic winter, from 71 degrees south latitude onwards, the sun sets on May 17th and is not seen above the horizon again until July 21st. This is completely at odds with the ball Earth theory, but easily explained by the flat Earth model. The midnight sun is seen from high altitudes in extreme northern latitudes during Arctic summer because the sun, at its innermost cycle, is circling tightly enough around the polar center that it remains visible above the horizon for someone at such a vantage point. Likewise, in extreme southern latitudes, during Arctic summer, the sun completely disappears from view for over 2 months, because there, at the northern tropic, at the innermost arc of its boomerang journey, the sun is circling the northern center too tightly to be seen from the southern circumference. Sammy Robotham wrote, "It is evident that in the great encircling oceans of the south, and the numerous islands and parts of continents which exist beyond that part of the earth where the sun is vertical, cannot have their days and nights, seasons, etc., precisely like those in the northern region. The north is a center, and the south is that center radiated or thrown out to a vast oceanic circumference, terminating in circular walls of ice, which form an impenetrable frozen barrier. Hence, the phenomena referred to as existing in the north must be considerably modified in the south. For instance, the north being central, the light of the sun advancing and receding gives long periods of alternate light and darkness at the actual center, but in the far south, the sun, even when moving in its outer path, can only throw its light to a certain distance, beyond which there must be perpetual darkness. No evidence exists of there being long periods of light and darkness regularly alternating as in the north. In the north, in summertime, when the sun is moving in its inner path, the light shines continually for months together over the central region and rapidly develops numerous forms of animal and vegetable life." In typical reverse-engineered damage control fashion, trying to explain away the midnight sun, problematic Arctic and Antarctic phenomena, and the fact that Polaris can be seen to 23.5 degrees south of the equator, desperate heliocentrists in the late 19th century again modified their theory to say the ball Earth actually tilts back 25.5 degrees on its vertical axis, thus explaining away many problems in one swoop. If it simply tilted the same direction constantly, however, this would still not explain the phenomena, because after 6 months of supposed orbital motion around the sun, any amount of tilt would be perfectly opposite, thus negating their alleged explanation for Arctic and Antarctic irregularities. To account for this, heliocentrists then added that the Earth also wobbles in a complex combination of patterns known as planetary nutation, the Chandler wobble, and axial precession, which, in their vivid imaginations, somehow explains away common sense. Common sense, however, says that if the heat of the sun travels 93 million miles to reach us, a small axial tilt and wobble, the difference of a few thousand miles, should be completely negligible. If the ball Earth actually spun around 93 million miles from the sun, regardless of any tilt or wobble, temperature and climate the whole world over should be almost completely uniform. If the heat of the sun truly traveled 93 million miles to reach the Earth's equator, the extra few thousand miles to the poles, regardless of any supposed tilt or wobble, no matter how extreme, would surely be negligible in negating such intense heat. E. Eschini wrote, "The supposition that the seasons are caused by the Earth's annual motion round the sun at a mean distance of 93 million miles is grotesque. According to Piazzi, the size of the sun is in proportion to the Earth as 329,360 to 1. The diameter exceeds that of the Earth 112 times. The Earth appears, as Biot says by this statement, a mere grain of sand as compared to the sun. This enormous expanse of light, focused on a rotating grain of sand, at the distance of 93 millions of miles, would cause the same season throughout it. The paltry few miles in comparison that separates London from Cape Town could never cause diverse seasons, neither would the distance from London to the Riviera justify the difference in the climate that characterizes the two places. Common sense also says if the Earth were actually a ball spinning daily with uniform speed around the sun, There should be exactly 12-hour days and 12-hour nights everywhere, all year round, regardless of any alleged tilt or inclination. Half the sphere would always be lit, and the other half not. The great variety and length of days and nights throughout the year all over Earth testifies to the fact we do not live on a spinning ball planet. There cannot exist phenomena such as this on a globe, nor the midnight sun, nor anything like Antarctic winter, where the sun is nowhere to be found for over 2 months per year. NASA and modern astronomy say the Earth is a giant globe spinning 1,000 miles per hour around its central axis, traveling 67,000 mile per hour circles around the sun, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the Milky Way, while the entire galaxy rockets a ridiculous 670 million miles per hour through the universe, with all of these motions originating from an alleged Big Bang cosmogenic explosion 14 billion years ago. That's a grand total of 670,568,000 miles per hour in several different directions we're all supposedly speeding along at simultaneously. No one has ever seen, felt, heard, measured, or proven such motion, yet the vast majority of people unquestioningly accept that the clearly motionless Earth beneath their feet is actually moving over 600 million miles per hour. NASA and modern astronomy say Polaris, the North Pole star, is somewhere between 323 and 434 light years, or about 2 quadrillion miles away from us. Firstly, note that is between 1.9 quadrillion to 2.6 quadrillion miles, making a difference of over 600 trillion miles. If modern astronomy cannot even agree on the distance to stars within hundreds of trillions of miles, perhaps their science is flawed and their theory needs re-examining. However, even granting them their obscurely distant stars, heliocentric astronomers cannot adequately explain how Polaris manages to always remain perfectly aligned straight above the North Pole. If the globe Earth was really spinning west to east 1,000 miles per hour, orbiting the sun counterclockwise at 67,000 miles per hour, spiraling around the outer arms of the Milky Way at 500,000 miles per hour, while shooting through the universe at 670 million miles per hour, how is it even conceptually possible that Polaris, 2 quadrillion miles away, day after day, year after year, always maintains its alignment straight above the North Pole? That would mean from 2 quadrillion miles away, Polaris would have to be perfectly mirroring Earth's several simultaneous wobbling, spinning, spiraling, and shooting motions. Polaris would have to be shooting the same direction through the universe at exactly 670 million miles per hour. It would have to be following the same 500,000 mile per hour, 225 million year spiral around the Milky Way, and mirroring the same 67,000 mile per hour, 365-day orbit around our sun. Or, the Earth is stationary, as common sense and everyday experience testifies. William Carpenter wrote, "It is supposed in the regular course of the Newtonian theory that the Earth is in June about 190 million miles away from its position in December. Now since we can in middle north latitudes see the North Star on looking out of a window that faces it, and out of the very same corner of the very same pane of glass in the very same window all the year round, it is proof enough for any man in his senses that we have made no motion at all." Not only this, but viewed from a ball Earth, Polaris, situated almost straight over the North Pole, should not be visible anywhere in the southern hemisphere. For Polaris to be seen from the southern hemisphere of a globular Earth, the observer would have to be somehow looking through the globe, and miles of land and sea would have to be transparent. Polaris can be seen, however, up to approximately 23.5 degrees south latitude. Dr. Robotham wrote, "If the Earth is a sphere and the pole star hangs over the northern axis, it would be impossible to see it for a single degree beyond the equator, or 90 degrees from the pole. The line of sight would become a tangent to the sphere, and consequently several thousand miles of and divergent from the direction of the pole star. Many cases, however, are on record of the North Polar Star being visible far beyond the equator, as far even as the Tropic of Capricorn. William Carpenter wrote, "The astronomer's theory of a globular Earth necessitates the conclusion that if we travel south of the equator, to see the North Star is an impossibility. Yet it is well known that this star has been seen by navigators when they have been more than 20 degrees south of the equator. This fact, like hundreds of other facts, puts the theory to shame and gives us a proof that the Earth is not a globe." To account for this glaring problem in their model, desperate heliocentrists since the late 19th century have claimed the ball Earth actually tilts a convenient 23.5 degrees back on its vertical axis. Even this brilliant revision to their theory cannot account for the visibility of many other constellations, though. For instance, Ursa Major, very close to Polaris, can be seen from 90 degrees north latitude, the North Pole, all the way down to 30 degrees south latitude. The constellation Vulpecula can be seen from 90 degrees north latitude all the way to 55 degrees south latitude. Taurus, Pisces, and Leo can be seen from 90 degrees north all the way to 65 degrees south. Aquarius and Libra can be seen from 65 degrees north to 90 degrees south. The constellation Virgo is visible from 80 degrees north down to 80 degrees south, and Orion can be seen from 85 degrees north all the way to 75 degrees south latitude. An observer on a ball Earth, regardless of any tilt or inclination, would not logically be able to see this far. Dr. Samuel Rowbotham wrote, "Another thing is certain, that from within the equator the North Pole Star and the constellations Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and many others can be seen from every meridian simultaneously, whereas in the south, from the equator, neither the so-called South Pole Star nor the remarkable constellation of the Southern Cross can be seen simultaneously from every meridian, showing that all the constellations of the south, supposed pole star included, sweep over a great southern arc and across the meridian from their rise in the evening to their setting in the morning. But if the Earth is a globe, Sigma Octantis, the South Pole Star, and the Southern Cross, a southern circumpolar constellation, they would all be visible at the same time from every longitude on the same latitude, as is the case with the Northern Pole Star and the northern circumpolar constellations. Such, however, is not the case. Some heliocentrists have even tried to suggest that the pole star's gradual declination overhead as an observer travels southwards is proof of a globular Earth. Far from it, the declination of the pole star or any other object is simply a result of the law of perspective. The law of perspective dictates that the angle and height at which an object is seen diminishes the farther one recedes from the object, until at a certain point the line of sight and the seemingly uprising surface of the Earth converges to a vanishing point, i.e. the horizon line, beyond which the object is invisible. Thomas Winship wrote, "If we select a flat street a mile long containing a row of lamps, it will be noticed that from where we stand the lamps gradually decline to the ground, the last one being apparently quite on the ground. Take the lamp at the end of the street and walk away from it 100 yards, and it will appear to be much nearer to the ground than it was when we were close to it. Keep on walking away from it, and it will appear to be gradually depressed until it is last seen on the ground and then disappears. Now, according to the astronomers, the whole mile was only depressed about 8 inches from one end to the other, so that this 8 inches could not account for the enormous depression of the light as we recede from it. This proves that the depression of the pole star can and does take place in relation to a flat surface simply because we increase our distance from it, the same as from the street lamp. In other words, the farther away we get from any object above us, as a star for example, the more it is depressed, and if we go far enough it will sink or appear to sink to the horizon and then disappear. The writer has tried the street lamp many times with the same result." And Dr. Rowbotham wrote, "It has often been urged that the Earth must be a globe because the stars in the southern hemisphere move round a south polar star in the same way that those of the north revolve around the northern pole star. This is another instance of the sacrifice of truth and denial of the evidence of our senses for the purpose of supporting a theory which is in every sense false and unnatural. It is known to every observer that the North Pole Star is the center of a number of constellations which move over the Earth in a circular direction. Those nearest to it, as the Great Bear, etc., are always visible in England during their whole 24 hours revolution. Those farther away southwards rise north-northeast and set south-southwest. Still further south they rise east by north and set west by north. The farthest south visible from England, the rising is more to the east and southeast, and the setting to the west and southwest. But all the stars visible from London rise and set in a way which is not compatible with the doctrine of rotundity. For instance, if we stand with our backs to the north, on the high land known as Arthur's Seat near Edinburgh, and note the stars in the zenith of our position, and watch for several hours, the zenith stars will gradually recede to the northwest. If we do the same on Woodhouse Moor, near Leeds, or on any of the mountain tops in Yorkshire or Derbyshire, the same phenomenon is observed. The same thing may be seen from the top of Primrose Hill near Regent's Park, London, from Hampstead Heath or Shooter's Hill near Woolwich. If we remain all night, we shall observe the same stars rising toward our position from the northeast, showing that the path of all the stars between ourselves and the northern center move round the North Pole star as a common center of rotation, just as they must do over a plane such as the earth is proved to be. It is undeniable that upon a globe zenith stars would rise, pass overhead, and set in the plane of the observer's position. If now we carefully watch in the same way the zenith stars from the Rock of Gibraltar, the very same phenomenon is observed. The same is also the case from the Cape of Good Hope, Sydney, and Melbourne in Australia, in New Zealand, in Rio de Janeiro, Montevideo, Valparaiso, and other places in the south. If then the zenith stars of all the places on the earth where special observations have been made, rise from the morning horizon to the zenith of an observer and descend to the evening horizon, not in a plane of the position of such observer, but in an arc of a circle concentric with the northern center, the earth is thereby proved to be a plane, and rotundity altogether disproved, shown indeed to be impossible. When you look up at the sun and moon, you see two equally sized, equidistant circles tracing similar paths at similar speeds around a flat, stationary Earth. The experts at NASA, however, claim your common sense, everyday experience is false on all counts. To begin with, they say the Earth is not flat, but a big ball. Not stationary, but spinning around 19 miles per second. They say the sun does not revolve around the earth as it appears, but earth revolves around the sun. The moon, on the other hand, does revolve around the earth, though not east to west as it appears, rather west to east, and the sun is actually 400 times larger than the moon and 400 times farther away. That's right. You can clearly see they are the same size and distance. You can see the earth is flat. You can feel the earth is stationary. But according to the gospel of modern astronomy, you are wrong and a simpleton worthy of endless ridicule if you dare to believe your own eyes and experience. With haughty arrogance, the nearest hypnotized heliocentrist will then inform you that the sun is 865,374 miles in diameter and 92,955,807 miles from the earth. The moon is 2,159 miles in diameter and 238,900 miles from the earth, and those just happen to be the exact diameters and distances necessary for a viewer from Earth to falsely perceive them as being the same size. So you see, silly flat earther, it is all an illusion, and the apparent equanimity of our day and night luminaries in the sky results from mere coincidental parallax perspective. The sun does not revolve around the earth as it appears. Rather, the earth spins 1,038 miles per hour under your feet and revolves 67,108 miles per hour around the sun. The moon does indeed revolve around the earth, but not as it appears. Though it seems to move east to west just like the sun and everything else in the heavens, the moon actually spins west to east at 10.3 miles per hour, while orbiting Earth at 2,288 miles per hour, which, combined with Earth's 1,038 mile per hour spin and 67,108 mile per hour orbit around the sun, coincidentally results in all motions perfectly canceling out, making the moon seem to move across the heavens with similar path and similar speed as the sun, while always only showing us one side of its surface and perpetually hiding its dark side. Bernard Brewer said, "The moon presented a special math problem for the construction of the heliocentric model. The only way to make the moon fit in with the other assumptions was to reverse its direction from that of what everyone who has ever lived has seen it go. The math model couldn't just stop the moon like it did the sun, that wouldn't work. And it couldn't let it continue to go east to west as we see it go either, at the same speed or at a different speed. The only option was to reverse its observed east to west direction and change its speed from about 64,000 miles an hour to about 2,200 miles an hour. This reversal, along with the change in speed, were unavoidable assumptions that needed to be adopted if the model was to have any chance of mimicking reality." And Marshall Hall said, "They want you to believe that the moon's rotation is perfectly synchronized with its orbit, so that's why we only ever see one side of the moon, rather than conclude the obvious, that the moon is simply not rotating. Moreover, they had to slow down the moon's speed by 58,870 miles per hour and reverse its direction to west to east to successfully sell their phony heliocentricity system to a gullible public. I don't think there is one person in many, many thousands, regardless of education, who knows that the Copernican model had to turn the moon's observable direction around and give it a new speed to accommodate the phases and eclipses." William Carpenter said, "Astronomers tell us that the moon goes round the Earth in about 28 days. Well, we may see her making her journey around every day if we make use of our eyes, and these are about the best things we have to use. The moon falls behind in her daily motion as compared with that of the sun, to the extent of 1 revolution in the time specified. But that is not making a revolution. Failing to go as fast as other bodies go in one direction does not constitute a going round in the opposite one, as the astronomers would have us believe. And since all this absurdity has been rendered necessary for no other purpose than to help other absurdities along, it is clear that the astronomers are on the wrong track." There are several theories about the relative size and distance of the sun and moon, all with their points of evidence and points of contention. Flat earthers throughout the ages have used sextants and plane trigonometry attempting to make such calculations, usually concluding the sun and moon both to be only about 32 miles in diameter and less than a few thousand miles from Earth. Perhaps the least plausible model, certainly the most exaggerated and imaginative, is the reigning heliocentric theory, claiming the sun to be a whopping 865,374 miles in diameter, 92,955,807 miles from the Earth, and the moon 2,159 miles in diameter, 238,900 miles from the Earth. Heliocentrists' astronomical figures always sound perfectly precise, but they have historically been notorious for regularly and drastically changing them to suit their various models. For instance, in his time, Copernicus calculated the sun's distance from Earth to be 3,391,200 miles. The next century, Johannes Kepler decided it was actually 12,376,800 miles away. Isaac Newton once said, "It matters not whether we reckon it 28 or 54 million miles distant, for either would do just as well." How scientific! Benjamin Martin calculated between 81 and 82 million miles. Thomas Dilworth claimed 93,726,900 miles. John Hind stated positively 95,298,260 miles. Benjamin Gould said more than 96 million miles, and Christian Mayer thought it was more than 104 million. Thomas Winship says, "As the sun, according to science, may be anything from 3 to 104 million miles away, there is plenty of space to choose from. It is like the showman and the child. You pay your money for various astronomical works, and you take your choice as to what distance you wish the sun to be. If you are a modest person, go in for a few millions, but if you wish to be very scientific and to be mathematically certain of your figures, then I advise you to make your choice somewhere about 100 millions. You will at least have plenty of space to retreat into should the next calculation be against the figures of your choice. You can always add a few millions to keep up with the times, or take off as many as may be required to adjust the distance to the very latest accurate column of figures. Talk about ridicule. The whole of modern astronomy is like a farcical comedy, full of surprises. One never knows what monstrous or ludicrous absurdity may come forth next. You must not apply the ordinary rules of common sense to astronomical guesswork. No, the thing would fall to pieces if you did. Regiments of figures are paraded with all the learned jargon for which science is famous, but one might as well look at the changing clouds in the sky and seek for certainty there, as to expect to get it from the propounders of modern astronomy. But there is no means of testing these ever-changing, never-stable speculations and bringing them to the scrutiny of hard logic and fact. Indeed there is. The distance of the sun can be measured with much precision, the same way as a tree or a house or a church steeple is measured, by plain triangulation. It is the principle on which a house is built, a table made, or a man-of-war constructed. The sun is always somewhere between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, a distance admitted to be less than 3,000 miles. How, then, can the sun, if it be so many thousands miles in diameter, squeeze itself into a space of about 3,000 miles only? But look at the distance, say the professors. We have already done that, and not one of the wise men we have so often challenged has ever attempted to refute the principle on which we measure the sun's distance. If the navigator neglects to apply the sun's semi-diameter to his observation at sea, he is 16 nautical miles out in calculating the position his ship is in. A minute of arc on the sextant represents a nautical mile, and if the semi-diameter be 16 miles, the diameter is of course 32 miles, and as measured by the sextant, the sun's diameter is 32 minutes of arc, that is 32 nautical miles in diameter. Let him disprove this who can. If ever disproof is attempted, it will be a literary curiosity well worth framing. Measuring with sextants and calculating with plane trigonometry, both the sun and moon figure to be only about 32 miles in diameter and approximately 3,000 miles away. The moon is actually a semi-transparent luminary, and not the solid, spherical desert planet that NASA would have us believe. In fact, it is likely that both the sun and moon are not densely physical at all, and are simply luminous, flat disks able to pass by or through one another during eclipses. E. Eschini said, "The results of recent research prove that the heavenly luminaries are not worlds, but lights, and should cause all men who have been led to accept as proven Copernicus's theory of the motions of the earth to reconsider this subject." Gabrielle Henriette said, "The satellites of the earth are not masses of matter. They are luminous and transparent disks without substance. The moon, in particular, conveys the impression of being an ethereal manifestation, and the uncertain and elusive character which is usually associated with this satellite results precisely from its immaterial nature. It was recognized from the earliest times that the satellites of the earth, particularly the sun and the moon, were not solid, opaque bodies. They were first, until Aristotle, considered to be souls or spirits, which does not imply a physical nature. To the ancients, they were simply lights, and they gave the sun and the moon a very apt name. They called them luminaries. In the flat Earth model, the sun and moon luminaries revolve around the Earth once every 24 hours for the sun, and approximately 25 hours for the moon, illuminating like spotlights the areas over which they pass. The sun's annual journey from tropic to tropic, solstice to solstice, is what determines the length and character of days, nights, and seasons. This is why equatorial regions experience almost year-round summer and heat, while higher latitudes north and especially south experience more distinct seasons with harsh winters. The heliocentric model claims seasons change based on the ball Earth's alleged axial tilt and elliptical orbit around the sun. Their flawed current model even places us closest to the sun, 91,400,000 miles, in January, when it is actually winter, and farthest from the sun, 94,500,000 miles, in July, when it's actually summer throughout much of the Earth. They say due to the ball Earth's tilt, different places receive different amounts of direct sunlight, and that is what produces the seasonal and temperature changes. This makes little sense, however, because if the sun's heat travels over 90 million miles to reach the ball Earth, how could a slight tilt, a mere few thousand miles maximum, negate the sun's 90 million mile journey, giving us simultaneous tropical summers and Antarctic winters? Thomas Winship said, "The Earth is a stretched-out structure which diverges from the central north in all directions towards the south. The equator, being midway between the north center and the southern circumference, divides the course of the sun into north and south declination. The longest circle around the world which the sun makes is when it has reached its greatest southern declination. Gradually going northwards, the circle is contracted. In about 3 months after the southern extremity of its path has been reached, the sun makes a circle round the equator. Still pursuing a northerly course as it goes round and above the world, in another 3 months the greatest northern declination is reached, when the sun again begins to go towards the south. In north latitudes, when the sun is going north, it rises earlier each day, is higher at noon, and sets later, while in southern latitudes at the same time, the sun as a matter of course rises later, reaches a lesser altitude at noon, and sets earlier. In northern latitudes, during the southern summer, say from September to December, the sun rises later each day, is lower at noon, and sets earlier, while in the south he rises earlier, reaches a higher altitude at noon, and sets later each day. This movement round the earth daily is the cause of the alternations of day and night, while his northerly and southerly courses produce the seasons. When the sun is south of the equator, it is summer in the south and winter in the north, and vice versa. The fact of the alternation of the seasons flatly contradicts the Newtonian delusion that the earth revolves in an orbit round the sun. It is said that summer is caused by the earth being nearest the sun, and winter by its being farthest from the sun. But if the reader will follow the argument in any textbook, he will see that according to the theory, when the earth is nearest the sun, there must be summer in both northern and southern latitudes, and in like manner, when it is farthest from the sun, it must be winter all over the earth at the same time, because the whole of the globe earth would then be farthest from the sun. In short, it is impossible to account for the recurrence of seasons on the assumption that the earth is globular and that it revolves in an orbit around the sun." Gabrielle Henriette said, "The essential feature of the year is its division into 2 equal periods of 6 months, based first on the predominating length of the days over that of the nights, and vice versa, conditions which are governed by the varying hours of sunrise and sunset, and secondly, by the either high or low height reached by the sun in the heavens at midday. The first cycle, during which the days are longer than the nights, and the sun reaches its culminating point of the year, extends from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, i.e. March 21st to September 22nd, and the second cycle, during which, inversely, the duration of the nights exceeds that of the days, and the sun descends to its lowest point of the year, extends from the autumn equinox to the spring equinox, i.e. September 23rd to March 20th. These 2 6-month periods are also characterized by an opposition of temperature. During the first cycle, which corresponds to spring and summer, the heat gradually rises and falls, while during the second cycle, which comprises autumn and winter, it is the intensity of the cold which progressively increases and decreases. In the flat Earth model, the sun and moon spotlights are perpetually hovering over and parallel to the surface of the Earth. From our vantage point, due to the law of perspective, the day and night luminaries appear to rise up the eastern horizon, curve peaking high overhead, and then sink below the western horizon. They do not escape to the underside of the flat Earth, as one might imagine, but rather rotate concentric clockwise circles around the circumference from tropic to tropic. The appearance of rising, peaking, and setting is due to the common law of perspective, where tall objects appear high overhead when nearby, but at a distance gradually lower towards the vanishing point. Samuel Rowbotham said, "Although the sun is at all times above and parallel to the Earth's surface, he appears to ascend the firmament from morning until noon, and to descend and sink below the horizon at evening. This arises from a simple and everywhere visible law of perspective. A flock of birds, when passing over a flat or marshy country, always appears to descend as it recedes, and if the flock is extensive, the first bird appears lower or nearer to the horizon than the last. The farthest light in a row of lamps appears the lowest, although each one has the same altitude. Bearing these phenomena in mind, it will easily be seen how the sun, although always parallel to the surface of the earth, must appear to ascend when approaching and descend after leaving the meridian or noonday position. What can be more common than the observation that, standing at one end of a long row of lamp-posts, those nearest to us seem to be the highest, and those farthest away the lowest, whilst, as we move along towards the opposite end of the series, those which we approach seem to get higher, and those we are leaving behind appear to gradually become lower. It is an ordinary effect of perspective for an object to appear lower and lower as the observer goes farther and farther away from it. Let anyone try the experiment of looking at a lighthouse, church spire, monument, gas lamp, or other elevated object from a distance of only a few yards, and notice the angle at which it is observed. On going farther away, the angle under which it is seen will diminish, and the object will appear lower and lower as the distance of the observer increases, until, at a certain point, the line of sight to the object and the apparently uprising surface of the earth upon or over which it stands will converge to the angle which constitutes the vanishing point, or the horizon, beyond which it will be invisible. Heliocentrists would have you believe the very opposite of what every human who has ever walked the earth has seen with their own eyes. It is obvious to any child and sovereign-minded adult that the sun, moon, stars, and planets, every light in the sky above, revolves around the motionless earth beneath our feet. It is also plain to see that the sun and moon are both approximately the same size and situated relatively close to earth, not 400 times divergent and millions upon millions of miles away. To abandon your senses and everyday experience in favor of such unfounded science fiction fantasies is a fallacy of appeal to authority so extreme that it leaves the brainwashed believer impotent to trust his own natural instincts and forever thereafter chained to the fantastical explanations of astronomical charlatans. Thomas Winship said, "No one ever yet felt or saw the earth careening through space at the terrific rates it is credited with, but everyone who is not blind can see the sun move. But the matter can be tested. It may be known for certain whether the sun moves or not. Take a school globe and place a style on the semicircle that holds it in position. Cause the globe to rotate against a lamp on a table, and you will find that the shadow left on the globe is always parallel to the equator, at whatever angle you may incline the globe. Further, let the style be of sufficient length to allow the shadow to fall on a flat surface, moving the globe towards the lamp, and the shadow will be a straight line. If, therefore, the shadow left on the earth by the sun be a straight line, then undoubtedly the sun is stationary. Drive a stake into the ground in such a position as to expose it to the sun for the greater part of a day, the whole day if possible. Mark the end of the shadow every quarter of an hour, and you will find that the marks form part of an elongated curve clearly proving that the sun moves over a stationary earth." And David Wardlaw Scott said, "The path of the sun is concentric, expanding and contracting daily for 6 months alternately. This is easily proved by fixing a rod, say at noon on the 21st of December, so that on looking along it, the line of vision will touch the lower edge of the sun. This line of sight will continue for several days pretty much the same, but on the 9th or 10th day, it will be found that the rod will have to be moved considerably toward the zenith in order to touch the lower edge of the sun, and every day afterwards it will have to be raised till the 22nd of June. Then there will be a little change for a few days, as before, but day by day afterward the rod will have to be lowered till the 21st of December, when the sun is farthest from the northern center and it is dark there. This expansion and contraction of the sun's path continues every year and is termed the northern and southern declination, and should demonstrate to modern astronomers the absurdity of calling the world a planet, as it remains stationary while the sun continues circling round the heavens." In the heliocentric model, Earth is just one of 8 planets in our solar system, all of which are said to be huge spherical Earth-like habitations or globular gas giants millions of miles away. They claim the Earth under our feet, along with these 7 other planets, all revolve concentric circles or ellipses around the Sun, hence the term heliocentric. The previously prevailing geocentric model had placed Earth as the immovable center of the universe, with the Sun, Moon, stars, and planets all revolving around us, just as they appear. In the heliocentric model, however, which would be more appropriately titled the acentric model, the Sun is only the center of our solar system, while itself, supposedly, simultaneously, revolving 500,000 mile-per-hour spirals around the Milky Way galaxy, which itself is constantly shooting 670 million miles per hour away from an alleged Big Bang creationary explosion at the beginning of time. In the geocentric model, the 7 planets were known as wandering stars, with the multitude of other stars known as fixed stars. The wandering stars were so called because they can be seen meandering their own unique paths around the heavens, while all the other stars remain fixed in their steady group rotation around Polaris. The wandering stars also happen to be among the brightest in the night sky, and just as heliocentrists falsely claim the moon to be a mere reflector of the sun's light, they claim the bright starlight of these planets is merely them reflecting the sun's light back at us. This has already been shown to be geometrically impossible, however, as convex bodies do not and cannot reflect light in this way. In the heliocentric model, the wandering stars are all supposedly spherical Earth-like places several million miles away from us, while the fixed stars are all allegedly super-distant suns, similar to our own, but several trillion miles away, complete with their own solar systems and accompanying planets, perhaps even populated with sentient alien beings like ourselves. NASA's current official astronomical statistics state that there are upwards of 10 trillion such planets in our galaxy alone, and at least 200 billion galaxies in the universe. Therefore, they claim Earth is only one of 1 septillion planets in the universe. David Wardlaw Scott said, "Our modern astronomers imagine the stars to be immense worlds or suns, some of them many thousands of times larger than our own, and at an enormous distance. Sir Robert Ball, in his Cause of an Ice Age, says of Sirius that it is 1,000,000 times as distant from us as the sun, that it is 92 millions of miles from the earth. It is thought that stars are in a more or less advanced state of development, and that probably some of them may be already inhabited by beings suited to their spheres. Their distance from us they calculate to be so immense that, according to Sir William Herschel, the light from some of them will take 1,000 years to reach this world of ours." Dr. Samuel Robotham said, "Again, these stars are assumed to have positions so far from the earth that the distance is almost inexpressible. Figures, indeed, may be arranged on paper, but in reading them no practical idea is conveyed to the mind. Many are said to be so distant that they should fall with the velocity of light, or above 160,000 miles in a second of time, 600 million miles per hour. They would require nearly 2 million years to reach the earth." Sir William Herschel, in a paper on the power of telescopes to penetrate into space, affirms that with his powerful instruments he discovered brilliant luminaries so far from the earth that the light which they emitted could not have been less than 1,900,000 years in its progress. Albert Smith said, "The fixed stars are so called because, except for very long periods, they do not appreciably alter their relative positions, and they are mere points of light, so small that the most powerful telescopes cannot magnify them into disks. Yet they are supposed to be suns of immense size removed by the astronomers to immeasurable distance away from us, for the credit and convenience of their theories." NASA even claims to have sent several remote-controlled flying telescopes, like the popular Hubble camera, into outer space, transmitting back to Earth pictorial proof of the validity of their model. These Hubble pictures show that the wandering stars are all in fact spherical Earth-like planets, just as the heliocentrists claimed all along. The Hubble pictures show that the fixed stars are also in fact distant suns, trillions of miles away, just as the heliocentrists claimed. The Hubble pictures and videos, all of which are indistinguishable from a good Photoshop or Hollywood production, completely confirm for hypnotized heliocentrists the truth of NASA's claims and the existence of various celestial phenomena which only NASA and their advanced cameras can show, like planets, galaxies, black holes, quasars, etc. Using even the most advanced non-NASA telescopes, however, the fixed and wandering stars appear to be nothing more than tiny dots of multicolored light. It cannot be ascertained whether fixed stars are actually distant suns, whether wandering stars are actually Earth-like planets, or whether any of NASA's claims hold any validity outside of their alleged pictorial evidence from these supposed remote-control flying space telescope images. Outside of NASA, what evidence do we have that stars are actually distant solar systems? What evidence do we have that planets are Earth-like places in space? They are certainly interesting and plausible ideas, but there is absolutely no empirical evidence to support them. In fact, if NASA hadn't implanted such ideas into their heads, very few people would ever look up at the night sky and assume those little pinpricks of light were all Earth-like objects millions of miles away, or suns trillions of miles away, complete with orbiting planets and moons just like ours. The only reason people believe wandering stars are Earth-like planets and fixed stars are distant suns is because of NASA propaganda. As Gabrielle Henriette said, the planets are not solid, opaque masses of matter as is believed. They are simply immaterial, luminous, and transparent disks. If stars are all distant planets or suns, how is it that various phenomena have been observed, including stars changing color, intensity of light, sudden appearance, disappearance, or shooting quickly from one place to another? I have watched single stars changing their colors as regularly as a disco ball, others shooting through the sky and disappearing, and stranger still, I once saw a star shoot quickly straight upwards through the sky for 2 seconds and then stop again. Back in the late 16th century, when the heliocentric theory was starting to take hold over the imaginations of an unsuspecting public, Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe famously argued for geocentricity, positing that if the Earth revolved in an orbit around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months of orbital motion could not fail to be seen. The stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars. Thomas Winship said, "In the time of Tycho Brahe, it was said that the Earth revolved around the Sun, but he argued that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, the relative position of the stars would change very much, and the matter must, in the nature of the case, be easily detected. Accordingly, experiments were tried at intervals of 6 months, and the result showed that the stars were in exactly the same position as they had occupied 6 months before, thus proving that the Earth does not move at all. If the Earth is at a given point in space on, say, January 1st, and according to its present-day science at a distance of 190 million miles from that point 6 months afterwards, it follows that the relative position and directions of the stars will have greatly changed, however small the angle of parallax may be. That this great change is nowhere apparent and has never been observed incontestably proves that the Earth is at rest, that it does not move in an orbit around the Sun." When Tycho Brahe demonstrated that after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax could be detected, heliocentrists, desperate to patch the glaring hole in their theory, pushed their hypothetical distances to the stars into the trillions of miles, claiming the closest one, Proxima Centauri, was a ludicrous 25 trillion miles away, and thereby making all the stars so conveniently far that no appreciable parallax could be detected. This expedient explanation, which heliocentrists have clung to ever since, has proven satisfactory to silence the manipulated minds of the masses, but still fails to adequately account for several issues. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "It is found by observation that the stars come to the meridian about 4 minutes earlier every 24 hours than the sun, taking the solar time as the standard. This makes 120 minutes every 30 days, and 24 hours in the year. Hence all the constellations have passed before or in advance of the sun in that time. This is the simple fact as observed in nature, but the theory of rotundity and motion on axes and in an orbit has no place for it. Visible truth must be ignored because this theory stands in the way and prevents its votaries from understanding it." William Carpenter said, "Considerably more than 1,000,000 Earths would be required to make up a body like the sun, the astronomers tell us, and more than 53,000 suns would be wanted to equal the cubic contents of the star Vega. And Vega is a small star, and there are countless millions of these stars, and it takes 30 million years for the light of some of those stars to reach us at 12 million miles in a minute. And, says Mr. Proctor, I think a moderate estimate of the age of the Earth would be 500 million years. Its weight, says the same individual, is 6 heptillion tons. Now, since no human being is able to comprehend these things, the giving of them to the world is an insult, an outrage, and though they have all risen from the one assumption that Earth is a planet, instead of upholding the assumption, they drag it down by the weight of their own absurdity and leave it lying in the dust, a proof that the Earth is not a globe. Several experiments have since been performed and repeated by notable scientists like Albert Michelson, Edward Morley, George Airy, and George Sagnac, proving that it is the stars that revolve around a stationary Earth and not the other way around. The conclusive results of their experiments are not contested or even mentioned in modern astronomy books. Rather, they are conveniently swept under the carpet to keep prying minds from seeing through the lies. For example, the experiment known as Airy's failure, since it failed to prove heliocentricity, involved filling a telescope with water to slow the speed of light inside. Usually, telescopes must be slightly tilted to get starlight down the axis of the tube, supposedly due to Earth's speed around the sun. Airy discovered that actually the starlight was already coming in at the correct angle, so no change was necessary. This demonstrated that the stars move relative to a stationary Earth and not the other way around, because if it was the telescope moving, he would have to change the angle. Gabrielle Henriette said, "All the planets, including the sun, revolve around the Earth. These circumstances cannot be denied since they are plainly visible, either in the ordinary way with the naked eye or with the help of the telescope. It can be said in this connection that in the case of a science which should be based exclusively on observation and not on speculation, such as astronomy, the evidence of the senses is the only factor upon which conclusions can and must be based. If the planets can be seen revolving around the Earth, it is for the decisive factor that they do revolve in such a way. It is asserted that this is not so, and it is maintained that the Earth and the planets revolve round the sun. We note with astonishment, however, the bizarre and definitely suspicious fact that these planetary movements are not visible. They cannot be seen, and yet they are called real. How can these movements be proved and their speed be ascertained, since they are invisible? On the other hand, the existing geocentric planetary motions which can be observed and measured, and which consequently constitute a perfectly valid system, are condemned as unreal and apparent. A pertinent remark may incidentally be made on the subject. Why do the astronomical tables which are published year after year give the so-called apparent movements of the planets in the zodiac? Why take the trouble of calculating and putting them on record at all if they are not real? Why is it also that no mention is made of the so-called real movements of the planets? Marshall Hall said, "Trust your eyes and your cameras. They have no reason to deceive you about whether the stars are going around you nightly. Then get it in your mind. This single fact surrounding star trails that has been photographed thousands of times and cannot be denied must be explained away by the theoretical science establishment. All of the factless allegations, a rotating and orbiting Earth, billions of light-year distances to the stars, a 15-billion-year-old universe, the whole Big Bang paradigm, all of the alleged evolution of the universe, Earth, and mankind, that is to say, all of modern evolution-based cosmology controlling knowledge today, all of it, is completely undone if the stars are doing what cameras show they are doing, namely, going around the Earth nightly. If you can do so for a few minutes, just lay aside the Copernican indoctrination that accompanies such pictures and take a good hard look at these photographs of something that really, really happens every single night. Do you see what I see? I see all the visible stars in the northern skies going around the North Star in perfect circles. In other words, I see all the stars which these time exposures have recorded actually going around that navigational star that God put there for us in the northern hemisphere. Thomas Winship said, "The plurality of worlds is based on assumptions so contrary to known possibilities that the grand idea must be thrown into the waste paper basket. The supposed great distance of the sun from the earth is the main cause of the delusions of the learned as to the so-called worlds above us being inhabited. This distance is based on a fictitious idea, that of the revolution of the earth round the sun, which I have already shown to be unconditionally false. The sun is a small body of light and near the earth, therefore all the star distances are wrong, their sizes and all other suppositions. The plurality of worlds is only the logical sequence of belief if the earth be a rapidly revolving globe, but this has been shown to be ridiculous in the extreme. Evidence, apart from any theory, has been presented which entirely nullifies such an assumption and renders it absurd, showing that such an unnatural idea has not a vestige of natural fact to support it. The grand doctrine of the plurality of worlds, therefore, like all of the other grand doctrines of modern astronomy, must be consigned to oblivion. When it can be shown that this world is a globe, and by what known principle the inhabitants can hang onto the swinging ball, like the housefly crawls along the ceiling, it will be quite time enough to talk about the plurality of worlds. In other words, the plurality of worlds, if there's supposed to be many, many ball planets spinning around in this infinite universe, that only makes sense in the heliocentric spinning ball cosmology. It's been shown that the Earth is flat and motionless, so the idea that there are many other Earth-like planets out there, or there are many other ball habitations spinning around in the sky, is ridiculous. You can see with a telescope that the things that they call planets look exactly like the things that they call stars, and before they started calling them planets, they were called stars. They were called wandering stars. If the planets are supposed to be masses like Earth, why is it that their starlight is often brighter than the other stars, which they claim are suns? Why would they have light at all? It's the same like with the moon. They claim to land on the moon, and they show this desert planet, but we look up at the moon and see a shining light coming from this disk. If the moon is so bright, shining with light like that, why weren't the astronauts constantly illuminated by this huge light that shines all the way 238,000 miles to the Earth? But then when they're on the moon, it's just dirt. When you look at these things through an actual telescope, they just look like disks of light. They don't look at all like suns or like ball planets. And when you take a good look at what NASA is feeding you, it's CGI. All the ball planets, every shot that NASA shows of Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, did I miss any? All these things, all their pictures of these planets are clearly made on a computer. They are CGI, computer graphic images, computer generated images. So, the idea that there are many other spinning ball planets out there in the sky is false. NASA doesn't do science. NASA does science fiction. Heliocentricity is not science. It's science fiction. Geocentricity is what you actually experience. It's what actually happens. The flat Earth is what you actually experience. You do not experience a curve. You do not experience motion. You don't feel yourself moving 1,000 miles an hour. The stars don't change their relative positions. They're fixed because they're revolving around us just as it appears. Think about it. If we were revolving around the sun, and the sun revolving around the galaxy, and the galaxy revolving around the universe, guess what? All the stars would change their position every single night. You wouldn't be able to catch the same star trails 2 consecutive nights, let alone for hundreds and hundreds of years, not changing positions. If you had those 4 different motions, everything spiraling around each other, you can't have the North Star fixed and all the other stars fixed in their constellations revolving perfect circles around it. Can't happen. You couldn't even have perfect circle star trails. They would be spirals. They would be awkward spirals. They would be like elliptical spirals. So, point is, Earth is not a planet. It's a plane. They just added a T to the end and fooled everyone. And then they started saying, there's 1 septillion other planets too, just like Earth. And then once they got people believing that, now they're saying, and there must be life on some of those. So there's aliens. And now they're preparing you for aliens. That's what's coming next. They want you to believe in aliens. They want you to believe that there's some off-world enemy or friend that's going to come here to save or destroy us, and they're going to use that as a false flag event to further their agenda. It's been in the works for a long time, so this is a big one. You could even say that this is the purpose of the Ball Earth deception. What's the purpose? To create a world religion. What do you think NASA is? What do you think the spinning ball Earth, universe, Big Bang, evolution bullshit is? It's a religion. People believe this shit and it doesn't exist. So, why do they lie about the flat Earth, Eric? Because they're making you believe in a bullshit science fiction religion. That's why. You don't even know that you're in a cult. You don't know that you've been brainwashed. And how deeply you've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed so much that instead of thinking that you come from a intelligent consciousness, you think that you come from nothing. And monkeys. They brainwash you to think that you and Earth aren't special or unique, but that there's just infinite Earths and worlds and beings, and humans are not the most intelligent of the intelligent designers' designs. They want you to believe that there's some aliens out there, more intelligent. They want you to believe that they're more intelligent than you, because only they have the Hubble Space Telescope, and only they have all the technology necessary to tell you that, oh, stars are really suns, and the wandering stars are planets. And, oh, we found water on Mars with our little probe rover thing. Check out these CGI images we sent back on our million-mile internet connection that we have, but you don't, and you've never seen anywhere. Think about how effective this religion is. It's worldwide. It is a world religion. They have successfully created a worldwide religion and made people the whole world over believe in it. They teach it to them in government schools, and they're so indoctrinated into this religion, they have no idea that it's a religion. That's the point. They call it science. They have no idea that they're in a cult being brainwashed by a bunch of CGI pictures and fairy tales. So why the flat earth deception? It's the most successful religious indoctrination in history. That's why. Around the turn of the 20th century, in order to save the dying heliocentric model from the conclusive experiments of Airy, Michelson, Morley, Gale, Sagnac, Cantor, Nordmeyer, and others, Albert Einstein created his special theory of relativity, a brilliant revision of heliocentrism which, in one philosophical swoop, banished the universal ether from scientific study, replacing it with a form of relativism which allowed for heliocentrism and geocentrism to hold equal merit. If there is no absolute etheric medium within which all things exist, then hypothetically one can postulate complete relativism with regard to the movement of two objects, such as the Earth and Sun. At the time, the Michelson-Morley and Michelson-Gale experiments had already long measured and proven the existence of the ether, but the Church of Heliocentrism was not to be deterred. Einstein never tried to refute the experiments scientifically, choosing instead to object philosophically with his notion of absolute relativity, claiming that all uniform motion is relative and there exists no absolute state of rest anywhere in the universe. Nowadays, just like the theory of heliocentrism, Einstein's theory of relativity is accepted worldwide as gospel truth, even though he himself admitted geocentrism is equally justifiable. Albert Einstein said, "The struggle so violent in the early days of science between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus would be quite meaningless. Either coordinate system could be used with equal justification. The two sentences, 'the sun is at rest and the earth moves,' or 'the sun moves and the earth is at rest,' would simply mean two different conventions concerning two different coordinate systems." George Ellis said, "People need to be aware that there is a range of models that could explain the observations. For instance, I can construct you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center, and you cannot disprove it based on observations. You can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. In my view, there is absolutely nothing wrong in that. What I want to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that." Einstein's necessary modification to the heliocentric theory ultimately resulted in transforming it into the acentric theory of the universe, because the sun was no longer the center of anything, and all motion was only relative. Acentrists soon began postulating that not only is the Earth spinning 1,000 miles per hour and revolving 67,000 miles per hour around the sun, but the Earth, Sun, and entire solar system as a whole are simultaneously rotating around the Milky Way galaxy at 500,000 miles per hour. Furthermore, the entire galaxy with the Earth, Sun, and entire solar system are also simultaneously shooting 670 million miles per hour through the universe away from a Big Bang explosion at the beginning of time. E. Eschini said, "The theory of the three, now four, motions of the Earth and subsequent relativity is the result of trying to cover up one lie by another. They say that as we whirl in London at the rate of nearly 11 miles a minute, we are shooting into space around the sun at nearly 20 miles a second, and the sun itself moves around a point in space at the immense speed of 150 million miles in a year, pulling our poor Earth with him at the added speed, the distance that separates us from the sun, and in this maddening whirlwind of motions, they try to apply Euclid's spherical trigonometry to locate distances, which data was intended by Euclid to determine fixed points only.